Some men bury their demons so deep they almost forget what they're capable of. Logan Hayes was one of them. 32 years old, working a double shift at a hardware store, raising a sick little girl on his own, living small on purpose, because living small meant staying invisible. But invisibility is a choice, not a guarantee. And on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a corner diner on West 46th Street, 3 men with guns walked through the door and made every careful choice Logan had made for the past 6 years completely irrelevant. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a man decides he has nothing left to lose, keep watching. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The coffee was bad. That was Logan's first thought when he sat down at the corner booth. The coffee was thin and slightly burned, the kind that sat on a warming plate too long and nobody bothered to make fresh because the morning rush had already died down. He wrapped both hands around the mug anyway. It was warm. That was enough. Across from him, his daughter Emma was coloring. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and she was currently arguing with a green crayon that wasn't doing what she wanted it to do. 6 years old and already furious at things that didn't cooperate, Logan watched her and felt the specific ache that comes with loving something so completely you can barely stand to look at it straight on. "Dad," she said, without looking up. "Yeah." "Why is grass green?" "Chlorophyll." She looked up. "What's chlorophyll?" "Something in plants that makes them green." She considered this with the seriousness of a scientist reviewing data. "But why does it make them green?" "Emma." "What?" "Eat your eggs." She looked at the plate in front of her, picked up her fork, and stabbed a piece of scrambled egg with theatrical reluctance. Logan hid a smile behind his coffee mug. The diner was called Patty's, though nobody who worked there was named Patty. The owner was a heavy-set Greek man named Demetrios, who went by Demi, and who had been taking Logan's Tuesday morning order for the past 8 months without writing anything down. 2 eggs scrambled, wheat toast, black coffee for Logan. 1 short stack with exactly 2 pats of butter and the syrup on the side for Emma, because if the syrup touched the pancakes before she was ready, the whole morning was ruined. Demi knew this. Demi accommodated this. It was one of the reasons Logan kept coming back. The other reason was simpler. Patty's was 3 blocks from Emma's school, and they opened at 6:30, and Logan's shift at the hardware store started at 7:45. And this 40-minute window on Tuesday mornings was one of the only guaranteed pieces of quiet he got all week. No phone calls from the insurance company about Emma's treatment costs, no overtime schedules to sort through, no bills arranged on the kitchen table that he'd been staring at for 3 weeks, moving around like a card trick, as if a different arrangement would make the numbers smaller. Just coffee and eggs and a 6-year-old who wanted to know why grass was green. He was halfway through his toast when the door opened. He didn't look up immediately. That was the thing about 6 years of actively trying not to be what he used to be. You started to soften the edges. You stopped cataloging every entrance, every exit, every potential threat in a room. You stopped sitting with your back to the wall. Logan had actually made a conscious effort in the last year to sit facing the window instead of the door, because facing the door felt like a habit he couldn't break, and he was tired of being that person. He was tired of scanning. So he was facing the window when the 3 men walked in. He heard them before he processed them. Not words, just a quality of movement. The way people move when they're trying to look casual and failing. A certain kind of deliberate stride that doesn't match a Tuesday morning in a coffee shop. His body registered it before his brain did. Something shifted in his chest, some old switch flipping back on, and he turned around. 3 men, late 20s to mid-30s. 2 of them were built like they spent serious time in gyms. Not the kind of gym people go to for their health, but the kind they go to because their job requires it. The third was leaner, older, with a gray patch in his beard and the watchful eyes of someone who was there to think, not to swing. He was already scanning the room the way Logan used to scan rooms. That was what locked it in. Normal people don't scan. Cops scan. Military scans. And people who intend to do something in a space, they scan. Logan set down his toast. There were 11 other people in the diner, Demi behind the counter, 2 waitresses, a young woman named Sandra and an older one whose name Logan didn't know, a table of 4 construction workers near the door, still in their orange vests, a young couple in the booth across from Logan's, the woman reading something on her phone while the man ate silently, and one woman sitting alone at the counters, early 30s, dark hair, expensive coat, laptop open, a cup of untouched coffee near her elbow. Logan had noticed her when they came in. Hard not to. She carried herself the way certain people do when they're used to walking into rooms that rearrange themselves around them. Not arrogance, exactly. More like gravity. She had the focused, slightly exhausted look of someone who'd been working since 5 in the morning and would keep working until midnight, and who had stopped finding this unusual years ago. He didn't know her name yet. He would, very soon. The gray-bearded man, the one doing the thinking, walked directly to the counter and stopped 3 stools down from the woman. The other 2 fanned out without being told. One stationed himself near the construction worker's table. The other moved toward the back, cutting off access to the restrooms and the kitchen exit. They've done this before, some part of Logan's brain noted, flat and clinical. They know what they're doing. Emma looked up from her coloring. "Dad, your face is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The serious thing, like when you're trying not to be worried." He looked at her. 6 years old. She could read him like a newspaper. "Stay in the booth," he said quietly. "No matter what. You stay right here, you keep your head down, and you don't make any noise. Can you do that for me?" Her eyes got very large. "Dad!" "Emma!" His voice was calm. That specific calm that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with training. "Look at me. I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" She nodded, slowly. The crayon was still in her hand. "Good girl. Get down low." He had barely finished the sentence when the gray-bearded man reached under his jacket. The gun came out smooth and practiced. A compact semi-automatic, held at his side first, just long enough to make sure everyone in the room saw it before he raised it. That detail told Logan something important. They weren't here to rob the place. Robbers raise the gun immediately and start shouting. They want chaos, they want compliance, they want the whole room terrified before anyone can think. This man wanted recognition. He wanted one specific person to see that gun and understand what it meant. He turned to the woman at the counter. "Ms. Langford," he said. His voice was level, almost polite. "We're going to need you to come with us." The woman, Langford, didn't scream. She didn't reach for her phone. She went very still, the way prey animals go still when they understand that movement is what triggers the predator. Logan watched her hands flatten slowly on the counter and felt a cold, precise respect for her composure. "I think," she said, "you have the wrong person." "I don't." The man almost smiled. "Victoria Langford, founder and CEO of Langford Capital Group. Forbes, 30 under 30, 2 years running. Net worth just cleared $800 million, which is why you can afford to eat at a place like this and leave the coffee untouched." He glanced at her mug. "You should drink it, by the way. You look tired." The construction workers near the door had frozen. 2 of them had their hands raised without being asked. Survival instinct. Sandra, the waitress, had backed against the far wall and was very carefully not breathing. The young couple in the booth had gone rigid. Logan had stopped watching the man with the gun. He was watching the 2 flanking men because the man with the gun was the distraction. He was always the distraction. What mattered was the muscle. The one near the construction workers was facing outward now, watching the street. The one near the kitchen exit had moved slightly closer to Logan's booth, not targeting him specifically, just establishing a perimeter. He hadn't looked at Emma. Not yet. Logan did a very fast calculation, the kind that used to happen automatically before he'd spent 6 years trying to slow himself down. Distances. Angles. The weight distribution of both flanking men, how they were standing, where their center of gravity was, whether either of them had drawn yet. The one near the kitchen hadn't. His hand was near his jacket but not inside it, waiting for a signal, 12 feet to the nearer one, 22 to the one by the door. Graybeard is 8 feet from the counter. Emma is 2 feet from me, directly behind me. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Victoria Langford said. Graybeard sighed. Not theatrically, genuinely, like someone who'd hoped this would be simpler. He raised the gun to eye level, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Ms. Langford," he said, "we're not asking." And then the man near the kitchen exit made his mistake. He stepped toward Logan's booth. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't say anything threatening. He just stepped forward, probably to get a better angle on the room, and his eyes dropped, briefly, to Emma, crouched in the booth. Just a glance, just long enough to register her as a variable. Something happened to Logan Hayes in that moment that he'd been keeping locked in a box for 6 years. He got up. Not slowly, not carefully. The physics of it were simple. One moment he was in the booth, and the next moment he wasn't. And the distance between himself and the man near the kitchen collapsed faster than the man could process what was happening. There was no plan exactly, no strategy, just a sequence of decisions his body had made 10,000 times in training and 8 times in actual combat, and the sequence ran itself without his permission. The man had just enough time to widen his eyes. Logan's left hand came up and redirected the arm reaching for the jacket, not grabbing it, just steering it away from where the weapon was holstered, using the man's own forward momentum. His right elbow connected with the side of the man's jaw in the same motion, not a swing but a drive, the kind that puts weight behind it. The man's head snapped sideways and he was already going down before Logan had finished the turn. The whole thing took maybe a second and a half. The man near the door reacted faster than Logan had given him credit for. He was already spinning, already reaching, and Logan was still 10 feet away with no cover between them. Not good. He dropped behind the nearest table, dragging it over as he went, and the table took the hit. Not a bullet, they hadn't fired yet, but the man had his weapon out now and was moving around the fallen table to get a clean angle. "Nobody moves!" Graybeard had his gun up, sweeping the room, trying to track Logan while keeping Victoria in his sightline. "Nobody!" Logan didn't give him time to finish the sentence. The overturned table was made of that cheap composite wood that diners use because it's light and easy to clean. It was also, briefly, a projectile. Logan shoved it forward and to the side, not at anyone, just to create chaos in the man near the door's path. The man stepped back instinctively, his weight shifted to his back foot, and Logan was already inside his reach. What happened next lasted about 4 seconds and was not graceful. It was not the clean, choreographed sequence of a movie. It was 2 people fighting in a confined space with a table in the way and a gun that hadn't been fired yet but absolutely would be if Logan didn't control the arm holding it. He got both hands on the wrist, twisted until something gave, heard the gun hit the floor, and then the man threw a punch that caught Logan across the cheekbone and lit up his vision with white static. Logan had been hit harder. He'd been hit harder by people who were trying much more seriously. He drove the man into the counter with his shoulder, felt the impact through his whole body, and when the man tried to push off, Logan stepped back and let him, and then used the man's forward stumble to put him face down on the floor with his arm torqued behind his back. The man made a sound that was not a word and stopped moving. 2 down. 12 seconds, maybe 15. Graybeard had repositioned near the door. He wasn't running. He was smarter than that. But the room had clearly gone wrong in a way he hadn't planned for, and he was recalibrating. His gun was on Logan now. Victoria Langford had moved off the stool and was pressed against the counter behind Demi, who had his hands up and was very, very still. "Don't," Graybeard said. His voice was still level, still almost calm. "Stay where you are." Logan straightened up slowly. His cheek was throbbing, and he could taste copper at the corner of his mouth where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek. He put his hands slightly out to his sides, not raised, just visible. He'd heard trained people say "don't" in that tone before, in rooms a lot worse than this one. "You're not going to shoot me," Logan said. Graybeard tilted his head slightly. "And why is that?" "Because the sound will bring police in 4 minutes. You've still got your exit, but you can't carry her out of here with gunshots on record. That changes what this is, and you don't want what this becomes." He paused. "And because I'm not who you came for." A long, unpleasant silence. "You have no idea," Graybeard said quietly, "what you've just walked into." "No," Logan agreed, "but I know you're walking out without her." Graybeard looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite anger. It was more like assessment, the way a chess player looks at a board when a piece has moved in a way they didn't expect. Then he looked at his 2 men on the floor. One was still conscious, trying to get his arm under him. The other wasn't moving. He lowered the gun, slightly, just enough to change the message. "You should have stayed in your booth," he said. It sounded almost like advice. Then he turned and walked out. Not running, just walked. Logan watched him push through the diner door and turn left on the sidewalk and disappear, and then he stood in the middle of Patty's diner with his hands out to his sides and the sound of Sandra the waitress starting to cry somewhere behind him. "Emma?" He turned to his booth. "You can come out." She rose from the floor where she'd been curled against the seat cushion, crayon still clutched in both hands. She looked at the two men on the floor. She looked at the overturned table. She looked at her father, who was pressing two fingers against the corner of his mouth where he was bleeding slightly. "Dad?" she said very quietly. "Yeah, baby." "Is it over?" He looked at the door where Graybeard had walked out. At the street beyond the window, just a normal Manhattan morning reassembling itself around a delivery truck and a couple with a stroller and a guy on his phone who'd probably walked past the diner without knowing anything had happened inside. "For right now," he said. "Yeah, it's over." He said it the way adults say things to children when they need the child to feel safe, when the adult isn't entirely sure themselves. Emma crossed the distance between them and put her arms around his waist, and Logan put one hand on the back of her head and held her there. Over her head, he could see Victoria Langford standing up from behind the counter, smoothing her coat with hands that were very steadily not shaking. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything yet. The police arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Logan counted, not because he needed to, but because his brain had defaulted back to a mode it remembered. He gave his statement twice. To the responding officer first, then to a detective named Caruso who had dark circles under his eyes, and the patient, slightly skeptical expression of someone who'd been lied to professionally for 15 years. Logan kept the statement clean and simple. 3 men, 1 gun visible, 1 potential weapon on the second man. He'd acted to prevent a kidnapping when he perceived direct threat to himself and his daughter. He left out the part about the calculations. He left out the part where it had felt, for about 15 seconds, like something returning from a very long absence. Emma sat in the booth with a uniformed officer who had very kindly given her a small bag of pretzels from his jacket pocket. She was coloring again. Logan watched her from across the room and felt his hands unclench slowly, knuckle by knuckle. "Mr. Hayes." He turned. Victoria Langford was standing 3 feet away. She'd put away her laptop at some point and her coat was buttoned now, but there was still a tightness around her jaw that the composed expression didn't quite cover. She had a small cut on her palm, probably from grabbing the counter edge, that she hadn't seemed to notice. "Your hand," Logan said. She glanced down. "It's nothing." "You should clean it." "I've had worse." She looked at him with those direct measuring eyes. "You're Logan Hayes." "You heard the detective." "I did. I also pulled your face up on my phone while they were questioning you. Navy SEAL, served from age 18, decorated twice, discharged honorably 6 years ago." She paused. "You work at a hardware store." "I work at 2 hardware stores," he said, "and I do weekend deliveries." She absorbed this. "You have a daughter." "I noticed you noticed." "I notice most things." She glanced toward Emma, briefly, then back to him. "She's very calm for a child who just experienced an attempted kidnapping. She's tougher than she looks." "So are you, apparently." She held out her hand, the uncut one. "Victoria Langford." He shook it. "I know. The man told me before he left." A thin smile. Not the kind that means something is funny, but the kind that appears when someone is keeping something much larger, very tightly contained. "He told you my name," she said. "But I suspect that's the least interesting thing he knows about me." Logan looked at her. "Was this the first time?" She met his eyes. "No." The word was quiet and precise and carried about 100 pounds behind it. Logan waited. "3rd time in 8 months," she said. "Different people each time. Same," she chose her word carefully, "same level of organization. You've reported it. Each time. My security team has been investigating. The FBI opened a preliminary file." Her jaw tightened. "Nothing has stopped them." "But nothing has worked," Logan said. "No." She looked down at her cut hand as if seeing it for the first time. "Nothing has worked." There was a silence between them that had more texture than most silences. Logan recognized the shape of it. He'd sat in enough mission debriefs to know what it felt like when someone had been living with a dangerous situation long enough that the danger had become normal, and normal had become its own kind of exhaustion. "I'm not in the industry anymore, he said. "I'm aware. I do deliveries on weekends. You also just neutralized 2 trained operatives in under 20 seconds with no weapon and a child 2 feet behind you." She didn't say it like a compliment. She said it like a fact she'd assessed and filed. "What you do now doesn't change what you're capable of." Logan looked across the room at Emma, who had finished the green section of her coloring page and moved to yellow without any apparent concern for the crime scene tape being strung behind her. "I have a daughter with a heart condition," he said. "She needs medication that costs $400 a month before insurance, and the insurance is fighting the specialist visits. I work 60 hours a week, and I'm still behind." He turned back to Victoria. "My life is not simple enough to get complicated." "I understand," she said, "but I think it just got complicated anyway." She reached into her coat pocket, a gesture so deliberate and unhurried that the 2 officers near the counter didn't flinch, and produced a business card. It was thick stock, cream-colored, embossed. She held it out to him. "I'm not asking anything right now," she said. "I'm just asking you to think about a conversation." He looked at the card. He didn't take it immediately. "How did they know you'd be here?" he asked. "This diner." Something shifted in her expression. "That's an excellent question." "You changed your routine?" "I change my routine every week. I use 3 different cars, 2 drivers, and I've varied my morning schedule 43 times since the first incident." Her voice was still controlled, but there was something under it now, something tired and sharp and a little afraid. "They still found me." Logan took the card. He didn't say anything else. He put it in his jacket pocket and walked back across the diner to sit with his daughter, who was now debating with the pretzel offering officer about whether dinosaurs could have lived in New York City if people had been nicer to them. The officer was handling this debate with impressive patience. Logan sat down. Emma looked up. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "You're bleeding." "Little bit." She reached across the table and handed him a napkin. It had a green crayon smudge on one corner. He pressed it against his mouth and looked out the window at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday morning that was completely indifferent to what had just happened inside this particular building. The card in his pocket felt heavier than it should have. The story was on television by noon. Logan found out because his phone started ringing at 11:47 with numbers he didn't recognize, and then his coworker at the hardware store texted him, "Dude, you're on CNN." And then his landlady, Mrs. Petrova, knocked on his apartment door with the expression of someone who had important news and a fruitcake as an excuse for delivering it. "You're a hero," she told him, thrusting the fruitcake forward. "I'm a guy who had breakfast at the wrong diner," he said. The footage was from the traffic camera on the corner. It didn't show inside the diner, but it showed Graybeard leaving alone and unhurried, and it showed the emergency vehicles arriving, and apparently the responding officers had described what Logan had done to their supervisors, and their supervisors had described it to someone, and now there was a chyron on a cable news channel that said Davy veteran foils kidnapping attempt on billionaire heiress. "She's not an heiress," Logan said to the television, though there was nobody in the room. "She built it herself." He turned the TV off. Emma was in her room sleeping. She napped every afternoon, doctor's orders, part of managing the cardiac strain that the right medication could control if they could keep affording the right medication. Logan sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad and wrote down everything he could remember about the 3 men in the diner. Not for the police. He'd already given them what they needed. This was for himself. The way they'd entered, the way they'd fanned out, the tactics they'd used. The gray-bearded man who was clearly the intelligence, not the muscle. The deliberate, unhurried nature of it. 3rd time in 8 months. Different people each time. Same level of organization. He thought about that. Different people meant they weren't using a standing team. Too much exposure, too much shared knowledge. They were contracting, pulling from different pools. That was more expensive, but it also meant they were serious enough about security, on their own end, to absorb that cost. Which meant the people directing this had resources and patience, and a very particular interest in Victoria Langford specifically. Nothing has stopped them, she'd said. He wrote mole on the legal pad. Then he stared at it. He crossed it out. Then he wrote it again. Because the only explanation for how they kept finding her, despite rotating routines in multiple vehicles, and a professional security team that had presumably gone through all the standard protocols, the only clean explanation was that someone inside her operation was telling them where to look. He hadn't said this to her. He didn't know her. She could be part of it herself, some elaborate insurance play, though that seemed unlikely given that she'd been the one they'd put a gun on. He folded the legal pad in half and put it on the table. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, again. He let it go to voicemail. Then the voicemail notification appeared and he played it, expecting a reporter. Mr. Hayes, this is Richard Ames. I'm Ms. Langford's head of security. She asked me to reach out. If you're willing to meet, we'd like to discuss a potential arrangement. Compensation would be discussed at the meeting. We understand if you decline, but she wanted me to tell you. A pause on the recording, like someone who rarely pauses had been asked to deliver a message they weren't entirely comfortable delivering. She wanted me to tell you that she trusts you. She said you'd understand why that means something. Logan listened to the voicemail twice. Then he put the phone down and looked at the kitchen table. At the bills stacked at one end and the legal pad folded in the middle and the business card leaning against his coffee cup where he'd placed it without thinking about it. He thought about Emma's cardiologist, who'd used the phrase optimal intervention window 3 times in their last appointment. He thought about the number the specialist had quoted for the procedure that insurance was declining to cover. He thought about the color-coded payment schedule he'd made on a spreadsheet at 2 in the morning and then deleted because looking at it made it too real. He thought about a woman in an expensive coat who hadn't screamed when a gun was pointed at her face. He thought about Gray Beard walking out that door with the calm of someone who intended to try again. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Richard Ames. Not yet. Instead, he sat for a long time in the quiet apartment while Emma slept in the next room with a stuffed elephant she'd named Gerald, and he thought about what it meant to be good at something and to have spent years trying not to be. About the difference between hiding from a capability and actually being rid of it. The truth that Logan Hayes had never quite let himself look at directly was this. He had not left the Navy because he was broken by it. He had not left because of trauma or burnout or any of the clean narrative reasons that people ascribe to veterans who stepped back. He had left because of Emma, because her mother was gone and there was nobody else, and a child with a heart condition needed her father in the same country, the same city, the same apartment, every single morning without exception. That was the whole truth, simple and total. But simple doesn't mean painless. And 6 years of working hardware stores and doing weekend deliveries, 6 years of being someone small and invisible and uncomplicated, it had worked for what it needed to do. Emma was alive and cared for, and coloring pictures at diner tables and arguing about dinosaurs with patient police officers. Logan had done the thing he set out to do. The problem was that the self you bury doesn't die. It waits. He'd felt it come back this morning in about 3 seconds flat, and the most alarming part wasn't that it had come back. It was how natural it had felt. Like exhaling after holding your breath for 6 years. He finally picked up his phone and called the number Richard Ames had called from. It rang twice. Mr. Hayes? The same voice from the voicemail, careful and professional. Set up the meeting, Logan said. A pause. When are you available? He looked toward Emma's door. He had approximately 90 minutes before she woke up from her nap and wanted a snack and someone to listen to her theories about prehistoric New York City. Tomorrow, he said, after school drop-off, 8:30. We can do that. Ms. Langford will. Tell her I have conditions. Another pause, this one slightly longer. What kind of conditions? The kind we'll discuss at the meeting. He softened it slightly. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just need to know certain things are covered before I agree to anything. Understood. Ames's voice had shifted the smallest amount, from professionally neutral to something that might charitably be called respectful. I'll pass that on. One more thing. Yes? The person who told them where she'd be this morning, Logan said. It's someone inside. The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. 4 seconds was a long time in a phone conversation. That's a serious claim, Ames said. I know. Logan looked at the business card on his kitchen table. Which is why I'm telling you instead of anyone else. You decide what to do with it. He hung up. Through the wall of Emma's room, he could hear the soft, waffling sound of her breathing. Steady and a little labored, the way it always was, the way it had been since she was 3 weeks old, and the doctors had used words he'd had to look up on his phone in the hospital bathroom because he didn't want to fall apart in front of them. Steady. Still there. Still his. He got up and started washing the coffee cups. The meeting was in a building on Park Avenue with a lobby that cost more than Logan's annual salary to maintain and a security detail that was better dressed than any security detail he'd worked with in the military, but significantly less intimidating. He was processed through 3 different checkpoints before being escorted to an elevator that required a key card and went directly to the 41st floor. The conference room looked east. On a clear morning, you could see a sliver of the East River between the buildings. Logan noticed this because he always noticed exits and water and the direction the light came from, and he was no longer pretending otherwise. Victoria Langford was already there. She was standing at the window when he came in, not looking at her phone, not reviewing documents, just standing and looking at the city. She turned when she heard him, and he saw immediately that she'd slept badly. Not from the way she looked. She was dressed and composed and had the armor of professional presentation fully in place. He saw it in the set of her eyes, that particular flatness that comes from a brain that wouldn't stop running when the body needed it to. He knew the look. He'd had it for years. Thank you for coming, she said. You should know I haven't decided anything yet, he said. I know. She gestured at the conference table. Sit wherever you like. Water? Coffee? Coffee if it's good. The corner of her mouth moved. I actually make it myself. The office stuff is terrible. That was unexpected enough that he almost laughed. Almost. Then yes. There was a small table along the wall with a French press and a bag of coffee that had a roaster's label on it from a place in Brooklyn. She'd clearly set this up herself before the meeting. The specific domestic practicality of it, in this 41st floor conference room with its east-facing sliver of river view, was such a contrast that Logan filed it away. It told him something about her. He wasn't sure yet what. She poured 2 cups, set one in front of him, and sat down. Richard Ames came in a moment later and sat at the far end of the table with a tablet and a folder and the expression of a man trying to be present without being intrusive. You said you had conditions, Victoria said. Tell me what they are. Logan appreciated the directness. He'd sat in enough meetings where people went around the edge of things for 20 minutes before reaching the point. My daughter, he said. If I take any kind of security role, she needs to be covered. Not just me. Her. Residence security, transportation, medical. He paused. Her name is Emma. She's 6. She has a heart condition that's manageable with a procedure she hasn't been able to get. If that becomes part of compensation, you have my full attention. If it doesn't, we go home. Victoria didn't flinch at this. She'd either anticipated it or was good enough at concealing reactions that the result was the same. What's the procedure? She asked. Catheter-based repair. The specialist quoted, I'll have our medical team contact the specialist today. She said it simply, without theater. That's not a negotiation point, Mr. Hayes. That's a baseline. He looked at her. What is it? She said. Most people, he said slowly, would have made that sound more generous. Made me feel like I was getting something. You are getting something, she said. So am I. Transactional clarity doesn't require performance. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, the same gesture he'd used that morning in Patty's, he noticed. I told you yesterday I trust you. That's not something I say often. I'd rather start the way I intend to continue. Logan was quiet for a moment. The mole, he said. Ames looked up from his tablet. Victoria didn't move. Richard told you what I said. He did. Her expression was controlled, but something underneath it had changed. I've suspected it for 2 months. I couldn't be sure, and I couldn't say it out loud because saying it means trusting someone to investigate it, and I don't currently know who to trust. That's why you're talking to me, Logan said. I don't exist in your ecosystem yet. I have no history with your company, your staff, your investors. I have no angle. You have a daughter with a heart condition, Ames said from the end of the table. Not unkindly, just precisely. That's true, Logan said, and you should factor that in. But you should also factor in that the fastest way I get Emma what she needs is to make sure Victoria Langford is alive and operating long enough to pay for it. He looked at Victoria. That's not cynical. That's just honest. Something in her expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but a kind of recognition. The particular expression of someone who has been talked to diplomatically for so long that plain speech has become startling. All right, she said, tell me what you need. Access. To everything. Every record of every incident, every name in your security team, your executive staff, your board. Communication logs, if we can get them. And I work independently. I answer to you directly, not to Richard, not to anyone in between. Ames set his tablet down and looked at the ceiling briefly, which Logan interpreted correctly as a man exercising restraint. That creates some jurisdictional complications, Ames said. I understand. But if there's someone inside passing information, jurisdictional tidiness is how they stay safe. Logan turned to look at Ames directly. I'm not suggesting you're compromised. I'm suggesting that the cleaner I can work, the harder I am to track. Ames looked at Victoria. A long moment passed. Do it, she said. Logan picked up his coffee. It was significantly better than Patty's. He made a mental note to ask her where the beans were from, and then felt slightly ridiculous for making that mental note in the middle of what was clearly the beginning of a very dangerous professional arrangement. One more thing, he said. What's that? He set the cup down. Why you? 3 attempts, 8 months. That level of persistence is personal, or it's financial, or it's both. What is it? Victoria looked at him. For the first time in the conversation, she looked something other than composed. She looked like a person carrying a weight that she'd been carrying alone long enough that she'd forgotten it was unusual. That, she said carefully, is the question we need to answer. She opened the folder in front of her and slid a single photograph across the table toward him. It was a financial document, or most of one. Parts had been redacted. Logan could see transaction records, dates going back almost 25 years, and a series of company names he didn't recognize. At the bottom of the page, one name was circled in red pen. He looked at it. He stopped. He looked at it again, harder, as if looking harder might change what the name was. It didn't. Where did you get this? He said, and his voice came out flatter and quieter than he intended. It was sent to me anonymously, Victoria said. She was watching him carefully. 2 weeks ago. Whoever sent it included a note saying the document was connected to the attempts on my life. She paused. Mr. Hayes, do you recognize that name? Logan didn't answer immediately. He was looking at a name he hadn't seen in a document since he was 15 years old, a name attached to a death that had been ruled accidental, a name that had been the specific shape of a hole in his life for 17 years. His father's name. Yeah, Logan Hayes said, in the quiet of the 41st floor, with the sliver of river visible in the east and the coffee cooling in front of him. Yeah, I know that name. He didn't tell her everything at the meeting. He told her enough. He told her that the name on the document belonged to his father, James Hayes, who had died when Logan was 15 in what was officially recorded as a construction accident in Lower Manhattan. He told her that he had always, in the wordless way that children know things they can't prove, believed it wasn't an accident. He did not tell her about the specific shape of grief that had driven him to enlist at 18, the way his father's death had felt less like a loss and more like an unanswered question he'd spent his whole adult life trying to get far enough away from to stop hearing. He did not tell her that seeing the name had felt like the ground shifting under a building he thought was stable. Victoria listened without interrupting, which, he would come to learn, was one of her most valuable and unusual qualities. She took information seriously enough to be still for it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You don't have to do this, she said. I can find someone else to— No, he said. I do. She looked at him. I have a daughter, he said. I need this resolved. Not just the threat on your life, the whole thing. Whatever this is, whatever it connects to. He met her eyes. And if your instinct is to offer me an out to protect me from something hard, keep that instinct in your pocket. I don't need protecting from hard things. A beat. Understood, she said. He left the meeting with a temporary security credential, Richard Ames' direct number, a promise that the medical consultation would happen within 48 hours, and 17 years of something heavy, finally beginning to move. He called Emma's school on the way down in the elevator to confirm afternoon pickup. Her teacher answered and said Emma had correctly identified that New York City was built on a bedrock of schist during morning circle time and had explained to the class that this was very important information. Logan leaned against the elevator wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Then the doors opened, and he walked back out into the ordinary morning. He went back to Patty's the next Tuesday. He was not entirely sure why. Some combination of stubbornness and ritual, the idea of being pushed out of a routine by men with guns was the kind of thing he refused to accommodate. He sat in the corner booth, facing the door this time, no longer pretending that was something he should fight. He ordered the same breakfast. He drank the same bad coffee without complaint. He sat there alone because Emma had a checkup that morning, and his neighbor, Mrs. Petrova, who had been watching Emma on and off for 3 years with the particular generosity of someone who understood what it was to raise a child without enough help, had taken her. He sat alone and looked at the spot at the counter where Victoria Langford had been sitting, and at the floor where the overturned table had been, and at the kitchen exit that had been someone's perimeter point. Demi came over to refill his coffee without being asked. "You doing okay?" Demi said. "Yeah." "You sure? You've got the face of somebody who's not okay, but is going to say they are." Logan looked up at him. "I'm getting there." Demi seemed to consider this a satisfactory answer. He nodded once and went back to the counter. Logan wrapped both hands around the refilled mug. Outside the window, the city went about its business. Cabs and delivery trucks, and people with coffee cups and headphones. The ordinary machinery of a morning in New York that had no interest in what happened in the spaces between its gears. His phone buzzed on the table. A text from a number he'd just added to his contacts, a number that had not existed in his phone 48 hours ago. The specialist called. "They can take Emma in 3 weeks. I wanted you to hear it today." Logan sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. Then he picked up his coffee, bad as it was, and drank it in the gray Tuesday light, in the corner booth of a diner that had accidentally become the place where his quiet, carefully constructed small life had cracked open and let in something much larger and much more dangerous, and he was beginning to suspect much more necessary. He had a daughter who was going to get what she needed. He had a name on a document that was 25 years old and had been waiting for him. He had work to do. The coffee was bad. That was still true. He drank it anyway. The first week was awkward in the specific way that two people are awkward when they've been thrown together by circumstances neither of them would have chosen, and both of them are too practical to pretend otherwise. Logan showed up to the Langford Capital offices on Wednesday morning with a legal pad, a laptop that was 3 years old and ran slow, and the kind of focused quiet that Richard Ames clearly found unnerving. Ames had the look of a man who'd built careful systems over many years and was now watching someone walk through them with muddy boots. Not destructive exactly, just indifferent to the architecture. "I'll need the incident reports from all 3 attempts," Logan said, standing in the doorway of the small office Ames had assigned him on the 39th floor, 2 floors below Victoria's. "I can have summaries prepared." "Not summaries. The originals." Ames paused. "Some of that material is sensitive." "I know. That's why I need it." Logan set his laptop on the desk. "I'm not going to leak your security protocols to anyone. I don't have anyone to leak them to. I need to see the raw reports because summaries are already interpreted. Someone decided what was important before I got to read them, and I don't trust someone else's interpretation yet." Ames stood in the doorway for a moment with an expression that was doing considerable work. "Victoria approved full access," Logan said. Not unkindly. "She did," Ames said. "I'll have them sent over." He left. Logan sat down in the chair, which squeaked, and looked out the window at the building across the street and thought about what he knew and what he didn't. The list of what he didn't know was significantly longer. The reports arrived within the hour, 37 pages of them, and Logan read every word twice. The first attempt had been 8 months ago. A vehicle interception on the FDR Drive. Three men in an SUV trying to force Victoria's car to the shoulder. Her driver had evaded, nobody had been hurt, and the SUV had been found abandoned in the Bronx 2 hours later, clean of prints and registered to a shell company in Delaware that dissolved itself the following morning. The second attempt had been 4 months ago. A man at a charity gala who'd gotten close enough to inject something into the drink Victoria had set down on a table. She hadn't touched it, only because she'd been pulled into a conversation on the other side of the room and forgotten the glass. The man had disappeared into the event crowd and never been identified. The third attempt, of course, was Patty's diner. Logan read all three reports with the same flat, systematic attention. Then he turned to the security team's staffing logs and started cross-referencing. He was looking for overlap. Specifically, he was looking for who knew what and when. Which members of the security team had advanced knowledge of Victoria's schedule before each incident. It was the kind of work that looked, from the outside, like staring at columns of numbers. From the inside, it was more like listening to a building and trying to figure out which wall was load-bearing. By the time Victoria appeared in his doorway at 11:30 with 2 cups of coffee from the French press she'd set up in her own office and apparently brought down in her hands personally, he had a short list. She looked at the papers spread across the desk, the handwritten notes on the legal pad, the red circles on a printed organizational chart. She set 1 cup near his elbow without comment. "You found something," she said. "Maybe." He leaned back. "Whoever is passing your schedule, they're not in your security team directly." She sat down in the chair across from him. "How do you know?" "Because the overlap is too clean. 3 incidents, 3 different advance notice windows. The gala was 8 days out, the FDR drive was 4 days, the diner was same day." He turned the organizational chart toward her. A security team member with schedule access would know weeks ahead. The variant suggests someone who gets the information later, after the route or location has already been communicated to them for a different reason. Victoria looked at the chart. Her face was still, which Logan was starting to understand meant she was thinking hard. "An executive assistant," she said, "or someone in the executive tier who receives schedule information as a matter of course, but isn't in security." He paused. "How many people knew you were going to Patty's yesterday morning?" She thought about it. "My driver, my assistant, and the 2 people I'd met with the evening before. I'd mentioned I was going to that neighborhood the next morning." "Who were the 2 people?" She looked at him. "One of them is my head of legal, the other is a board member." "Names?" A longer pause. This was the specific, uncomfortable territory of suspecting people you've worked with for years. Logan recognized the expression. It was the expression of someone who knows intellectually that proximity doesn't equal trustworthiness, but who hasn't finished talking their feelings into agreement. "Carter Mills," she said. "Board member, been with the company since year 2. And Diane Reyes, she's run my legal team for 5 years. Logan wrote both names on the legal pad. He didn't circle them or mark them in any particular way, just wrote them. "I'm not accusing anyone," he said. "I know." She looked at the names. "It doesn't feel good." "No, it doesn't." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, that same gesture, and looked out the window for a moment. "My father used to say that the people closest to you are the ones who know which doors are unlocked." She said it in a tone that suggested she was quoting from memory, and that the memory had some weight to it. He meant it as a reason to choose carefully. I'm starting to think he meant it as a warning I didn't hear right. "Tell me about your father," Logan said. She glanced at him, slightly surprised by the direction. "Why?" "Because this company started with him, or started with the money he left, or it started in reaction to him. I don't know which yet. But whoever is running this operation has been at it for 25 years, and that means it predates your career, which means it starts somewhere before you." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone walked past the open office door without looking in. The building had the particular white noise hum of a large organization going about its business in ignorance of what was happening in this small room. "My father was Franklin Langford," she said. "He made his first money in commercial real estate in the 90s, then diversified into private equity. He died when I was 22. Heart attack." She said it matter-of-factly, the specific neutrality of someone who has processed grief into something they can carry without spilling. "He left me the capital to start the company. But honestly, I think he'd have been surprised I did it. He wasn't sure I was practical enough. Were you? A thin, dry smile. More than he thought. The document you showed me, Logan said. The one with my father's name on it. Where was it sent from? The email address was a temporary account. My IT team traced it as far as a server in Newark before it disappeared. The attachment was scanned from an original physical document. She leaned forward slightly. Logan, the transactions on that document, the ones involving your father's name, they're dated from 1998 and 1999. My father was very active in certain investment circles at exactly that time. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. You think your father and my father knew each other, Logan said. I think they were in the same document for a reason. She met his eyes. I've been trying to access my father's financial records from that period for 3 weeks. Most of them should be in archive storage. Some of them are missing. Logan picked up his pen, then set it back down. Who manages the archive? The same firm that managed my father's estate. Harwick and Associates. They've been the company's retained counsel since before I took over. She paused. Carter Mills introduced me to them. Logan looked at the legal pad, at Carter Mills's name. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, I know where to start. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not quite trust, not quite doubt. Somewhere in the particular middle distance between the two, where most honest assessments live. You do this differently than I expected, she said. How'd you expect? More aggressively, more visibly. She considered. You're very quiet about it. Loud doesn't find things, he said. It just moves them around. She seemed to file this away. She stood, picked up her coffee cup. Emma's appointment is Thursday. I'll have a car. I'll take her myself. Logan, I appreciate it. I'll take her myself. He looked up. It's not about the offer. I just need to be the one to take her. She read something in his face and didn't push it. That was, he was learning, one of her better qualities. She knew when a line wasn't about logistics. All right, she said. Let me know what you find on Mills. She left. Logan turned back to the organizational chart and the security logs and the red circles he'd made, and started the slow, methodical work of pulling a thread to see what it was attached to. The thread, as it turned out, was attached to something very old and very ugly, and it did not want to be pulled. Carter Mills was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the particular comfortable authority of someone who had sat on enough boards for long enough that rooms tended to arrange themselves around his opinion. He had an office on the 38th floor that Logan passed twice on his way to and from Ames's space, and both times Mills was visible through the glass wall, on the phone or in conversation, radiating the specific low-frequency confidence of a man who had never seriously considered that he might be caught doing anything. Logan did not look at him directly either time. He spent 2 days in the archive request logs, which Ames obtained for him from the IT department under the cover of a routine security audit, a small useful fiction that Ames had suggested himself, which raised him slightly in Logan's estimation. What Logan found in the logs was not dramatic. It was actually quite dull, which was the point. Someone had accessed the Langford archive 3 times in the past 4 months. The access was logged under a maintenance account, the kind of generic credential that exists in every large company and is shared by IT staff for routine file management, and that, precisely because it's generic and routine, tends not to attract attention. Except that the maintenance account had no service tickets associated with those 3 access events. Routine maintenance always generates a ticket. It's how IT departments track their own work. 3 accesses with no tickets meant someone had used the maintenance account not to maintain anything, but to look at something, or to remove something. Logan printed the access logs, folded them, and put them in his jacket pocket. He needed to know who had the maintenance credentials, which meant he needed to talk to someone in IT without going through channels that might reach the wrong ear. He found the right person through the least sophisticated method available. He walked to the IT department on the 22nd floor and looked for whoever was there at 7:30 in the morning before anyone else had arrived, on the theory that people who come to work early tend to be the ones who actually care about it. The person there at 7:30 was a young woman named Priya, who was 24 and had 3 monitors and a cold brew, and was deep in what appeared to be a network diagnostic when Logan knocked on the open door frame. "You're the new security guy," she said, without much ceremony. "Yeah." "You want something from IT without filing a formal request." He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because you came at 7:30, and you look like you're trying to seem casual, which is the exact opposite of casual." She turned back to her monitors. "What do you need?" He liked her immediately. He told her what he needed: the list of staff with access to the maintenance credentials for the archive system. She pulled it up in 4 minutes, which was either impressive or slightly alarming depending on your perspective on data security. There were 9 names. 7 were IT staff. 1 was a facilities manager. 1 was Carter Mills's executive assistant, a man named Paul Garrett, who had been with Mills for 11 years. Logan looked at the name. "Can you tell me when this credential was last used by this account?" He pointed to Garrett's name on the screen. Priya typed for a moment. 8 weeks ago. And before that 6 months ago and 9 months ago. 9 months ago was right before the first attempt on Victoria's life. Logan thanked her and left before she could ask questions he didn't want to answer yet. He went back to his office and sat for a while with the folded logs on the desk in front of him and thought about Paul Garrett, whom he'd never met, and about Carter Mills, who had introduced Victoria to the firm that managed her father's missing archives, and about a document from 1999 with his father's name on it that had been sent to Victoria by someone who clearly wanted it found. That last part kept bothering him. Someone had sent the document, anonymously through a disappearing email traced to a dead-end server. Someone wanted Victoria to know about it, wanted it badly enough to send it to the person most likely to be hurt by what it meant. That wasn't a warning. That was something else. That was someone pushing the situation to a point of confrontation, forcing someone else's hand. The question was whose hand, and why now? He was still sitting with that question at 5 in the evening when his phone rang with a number he recognized as Emma's school. His heart did the specific thing it did whenever a school number called. He answered immediately. "Mr. Hayes?" It was the school secretary, Linda, who knew him by voice. "Emma's fine," she said first, because she'd learned over 2 years that this was always what he needed to hear before any other information. "But she's been crying in the nurse's office for about an hour. She won't really say why. Can you come?" He was out the door before she finished the sentence. Emma was sitting on the paper-covered examination table in the nurse's office with her coat on and her backpack in her lap, holding it with both arms the way she held Gerald the stuffed elephant at night. She'd been crying, but she'd stopped. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she had that particular dried-out look of a child who'd cried long enough that the crying had simply exhausted itself. When she saw Logan, she didn't cry again. She just looked at him with those dark eyes and said, "I knew you'd come." "Of course I came." He crouched down to her level. "What happened?" She looked at her backpack for a moment. "Jalen told everyone you beat up people in the diner and you're famous, and he asked if you're going to go back to being a soldier and leave." Logan was quiet for a second. "He said lots of famous dads stop being regular dads," Emma said. "Jalen is wrong," Logan said. "How do you know? He said his cousin's dad..." "Emma." He waited until she looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere. Not to the army, not anywhere. You understand?" "But what if you have to?" "I don't have to. I chose this job. I can unchoose it." He put his hand on top of hers, where she was gripping the backpack. "You're stuck with me. That's permanent." She looked at him for a long moment with the specific scrutiny of a 6-year-old assessing whether an adult is telling them a useful truth or a comfort truth. Logan held still under the scrutiny. He'd learned that trying to sell things to Emma never worked. She had to arrive at belief herself. "Okay," she finally said. "Can we get the egg rolls from the place on Amsterdam?" "Yeah, we can get the egg rolls." She slid off the table. The backpack went over one shoulder. At the door, she stopped and looked back at him. "Dad, are you okay? With your new job?" He stood up. "Yeah, Bug, I'm okay." "Because you seem different, not bad different, just..." She made a small, uncertain gesture with her hand that meant something she didn't have words for yet. "More like myself," he said quietly. She thought about this. "Okay," she said, and walked out to the hallway. He followed her, and the word he'd used sat in his chest with a strange, uncomfortable weight because it was exactly right, and he wasn't sure how to feel about that. The egg rolls were good. They ate them at the kitchen table while Emma told him about the geological composition of Manhattan bedrock, which she had now apparently incorporated into a comprehensive theory about where dinosaurs might have sheltered during bad weather. Logan listened and nodded and ate his egg rolls and let the ordinary mechanics of the evening do their work. Later, after Emma was asleep with Gerald tucked under her arm, he sat at the kitchen table with the printed access logs and his legal pad and a cup of tea he'd made because it was too late for coffee. And he thought about his father. James Hayes had been a construction project manager. That was the official version. The version on the death certificate, the version at the insurance company, the version Logan had grown up with. He'd managed large commercial projects in Manhattan in the 90s, working for a firm that had since been absorbed into a larger one and then absorbed again. He'd been good at his job, well regarded, and he died at 41 in what was ruled a workplace accident on a project site in Lower Manhattan in January 2000. Logan had been 50. His mother had been 43 and had handled it with the specific terrible competence of a woman who understood that falling apart was not something she had time for, and who had paid a significant interior price for that competence. She died of cancer when Logan was 27. He'd been in the Navy when it happened. He'd made it back for the last 2 weeks. What Logan had never told anyone, not in all his years in the service, not to the Navy therapist he'd been required to see twice after his second deployment, not to anyone, was that he had been at the project site the night his father died. Not because he was supposed to be there, because he'd gone looking for his father after he didn't come home for dinner, which was unusual enough for a man who called his wife every time he was going to be late. Logan had ridden the subway to the job site, a half-finished office building in Lower Manhattan, and what he'd found there was his father in a heated conversation with a man in a dark coat whose face Logan had never been able to fully reconstruct in memory. Only fragments, a gray at the temple, a certain quality of authority in how he stood. They'd been in the skeleton of the building, in a section with temporary lighting, talking next to a set of construction documents spread on a makeshift table. Logan had been too far away to hear words, just tones. His father's voice urgent, rising. The other man's voice flat and unmoved. Then Logan had slipped on a piece of scrap metal and made noise, and his father had looked up and seen him and the expression on his face, not scared, not guilty, just a specific wordless communication of go home right now, please, had sent Logan back to the subway without a word. His father was dead by morning. Logan had told no one what he'd seen. He'd been 15. He hadn't known what to do with it, and over time the memory had developed the quality of something that might not have happened the way he remembered it, might have been distorted by grief, might not mean what he thought it meant. He had spent 17 years being very disciplined about not thinking about it. Now he unfolded the document he'd photographed on his phone in Victoria's conference room. His father's name in a transaction record from 1999. A payment, it looked like. A significant one. From a company name he'd never heard of. Meridian Strategic Holdings. He typed the name into his laptop. Meridian Strategic Holdings had been dissolved in 2001. Before that, it was a private investment vehicle registered in Delaware. Directors listed in the filing, 4 names. 3 he didn't recognize. The 4th was a name he'd seen on an organizational chart 2 days ago, Carter Mills. Logan sat back. He sat there for a long time with the laptop open and the tea going cold and the sound of Emma breathing through the baby monitor he still used on bad nights, because the cardiac events, when they came quietly. His father had received a payment from a company that Carter Mills had helped direct in 1999, 1 year before his father died. Whatever James Hayes had known, whatever those construction documents were that he'd been arguing over in a half-finished building in January of 2000, it was connected to the same network that was now trying to kill Victoria Langford. And someone had sent Victoria the document. Someone had wanted her to know. Someone had wanted this pulled into the light. Someone who had presumably been sitting on this information for a long time and had finally decided, or been forced, to move. Logan closed the laptop. He went to check on Emma. She was on her back with one arm thrown over her head and Gerald wedged against her ribs, and her breathing was even, and she looked so much like herself, so completely and undramatically herself, that something in Logan's chest made a sound that wasn't quite a feeling and wasn't quite a thought. He stood in the doorway until he was sure she was breathing fine. Then he went back to the kitchen and picked up his phone and texted Victoria. Mills is connected. Not just the company. His history goes back to when our fathers were both in play. I found a link. We need to talk tomorrow, early. She replied in 4 minutes, which meant she was awake and working at 11:30 at night, which did not surprise him. My office at 7. I'll have coffee. He put the phone down. The apartment was quiet. Outside, Manhattan was doing what it always did. Traffic and voices, and the particular nighttime frequency of a city that never actually stops, just shifts, registers. Logan was not sleeping particularly well these days, but he slept that night because exhaustion eventually wins arguments with anxiety, and he had been running both for long enough that the body was calling in its debt. He dreamed about the construction site, the temporary lights, his father's face looking up at him across the broken floor of an unfinished building. Go home. He woke up at 5:15 and lay in the dark and listened to Emma sleep. Then he got up and made coffee and went back to work. The meeting with Victoria at 7 was not the meeting Logan had planned, because at 6:48, as he was walking the 3 blocks from the subway to the Langford Capitol building, his phone rang with Ames's number. We have a problem, Ames said. His voice had the specific, careful control of someone delivering bad news to someone they expect to have a strong reaction, and pacing themselves accordingly. What kind? Logan said. The kind that walked into the building this morning. Paul Garrett, Mills's assistant, handed in his resignation at 6:30, cleaned his desk, already gone. Logan stopped walking. He's running. It looks that way. Does Mills know? Mills isn't in yet. He doesn't come in before 9. A pause. Logan. Someone tipped Garrett off. Someone told him we were looking. Logan started walking again, faster. Who knew I was looking at Garrett? Silence. Ames. 3 people, Ames said. Myself, Victoria, and Priya in IT. A pause. I trust myself and I trust Victoria. I don't know Priya. Priya didn't know why I was asking, Logan said. She pulled a personnel list. She didn't know I was connecting it to Garrett specifically. Then how? Because I've been in the building for a week asking questions, Logan said, and Garrett has been nervous for longer than a week. He was already watching. He pushed through the lobby door. He didn't need someone to tip him off. He was already looking for the signal. My being here was the signal. He took the elevator up and walked into Victoria's office at 6:53, 2 minutes earlier than planned, and found her already standing at her window with a coffee cup and the expression of someone who'd just gotten the same call. Garrett's gone, she said. I know. He crossed the room and set his phone on her desk with the photo of the Meridian Strategic Holdings filing on the screen. Look at this. She looked. He watched her read it, watched the moment she found Mills's name, watched her face do something complicated and controlled. Carter, she said, quietly, almost inaudibly. He's been in this since before you took over the company, maybe before your father died. Logan sat down. Whoever has been running this for 25 years, Mills isn't the top. He's not organized enough for this to be his operation. He's a connector. He's the person who made introductions and opened doors and kept records for someone else. For who? I don't know yet. She turned from the window. Garrett running means they know we're close. Yes. Which means they'll move faster. Yes. She put the coffee cup down on her desk with a small, precise click. And my company. If this goes where I think it's going, if Carter has been feeding information to whoever this is, sitting on my board, directing things from the inside, she stopped. How much of what I've built is compromised? It was an honest question, not rhetorical. She wanted an honest answer. I don't know, Logan said, but I think you need to start operating on the assumption that any communication through standard company channels is potentially visible to the wrong person, which means we need to work differently. How differently? Small, face-to-face, nothing in writing that goes through company systems. He looked at her. And I need you to trust me on the timeline. We're close to something, and the temptation is going to be to push it to a conclusion, to confront Mills, to involve federal investigators right now. That instinct is going to get us one board member and lose the person above him. We need to be patient. She held his gaze. There was something in her expression that was effortful, not because she doubted him, he thought, but because patience had never been the strategy that built her company. She had gotten to 30 years old and $800 million in assets by moving decisively and not waiting for things to arrange themselves. "How patient," she said, "until I find the top of this." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay? Okay?" I said okay. The smallest possible edge of frustration in her voice, not at him, at the situation. "I'm trusting your read. Don't make me regret it." "I'll try not to." She picked up her coffee again, looked at the filing on his phone screen again. "Your father," she said. "He was paid by Meridian. That's Carter's company. But what was he paid for?" "I think he was paid to stay quiet about something he found on a job site," Logan said. "And I think when the money didn't keep him quiet enough, they found another solution." The sentence sat in the room. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. He looked at her. The words were simple, and she said them simply, without ornamentation, and that was exactly why they landed. He'd had people say "I'm sorry" about your father in various forms his entire adult life, and most of them had been trying to offer comfort, which was fine, and he'd nodded through all of it. This was something different. She wasn't offering comfort. She was acknowledging a fact the way you acknowledge something that deserves acknowledgement, even when there's nothing to be done about it. "He didn't deserve it," Logan said. "No, he didn't." A pause between them that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just real. Two people in a room with the weight of something shared between them that neither of them had asked for, and both of them were going to have to carry through to its end. "I need a favor," Logan said. "Name it." "I need access to your father's files, the ones that weren't archived, the personal ones, the kind of thing families keep." He watched her face. "If my father was connected to your father's world in 1999, there might be something in what Franklin left behind, an overlap, a name, something that points to who was running Meridian from above Mills." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I have boxes," she said finally, "from when I cleared his apartment. I put them in storage, and I haven't opened them since." Another pause. "I was 22. I wasn't ready." "You don't have to be there when I look." "I do," she said. "I think I do." She picked up her phone. "I'll arrange access to the storage unit. Saturday?" "Saturday works." "Emma's appointment is Thursday." "I know." "How are you getting there?" "I told you." "I'm not offering a car. I'm asking how you're getting there." A slight shift in her voice, less CEO, more person. "Because I'd like to come if that's not—" She stopped, started again. "I'd like to meet her, if that's all right." Logan looked at her. It was an unexpected thing to ask, and because it was unexpected, it was probably more honest than anything else she'd said that week. "She'll ask you questions," he said. "I expect that. Uncomfortable ones. She doesn't have a filter yet." "Neither do I, when I'm tired." The corner of her mouth moved. "We'll get along fine." He thought about Emma in the nurse's office, holding her backpack, asking if he was going back to being a soldier and leaving. He thought about what it meant to let someone new into the specific, carefully maintained perimeter of their life. Two people who had gotten very good at being enough for each other. "Thursday at 8, he said. Don't be late. She has opinions about punctuality." "Noted." He stood up to go. At the door he stopped. "The person who sent you the document," he said. "I keep coming back to it. They knew about my father. They knew that name would connect to me specifically, eventually, if you dug far enough." He looked at her. "That's not random. They chose you because they knew I'd end up here." Victoria looked at him with those direct, measuring eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whoever sent that document might be the one person in 25 years who actually wants this to end." He paused. "Which means somewhere out there, there's a witness." He left her with that and walked back to his office, and he spent the rest of the morning pulling on threads, and the building hummed around him with the ordinary sound of people doing ordinary work, while underneath it, in the specific way that everything important happens underneath the surface of ordinary things, something that had been buried for 25 years was shifting in the dark. Thursday came, and the cardiologist's name was Dr. Amara Chen, and she was 50 and direct and had a small succulent on her desk that she called Gerald, which Emma found so profoundly satisfying that she talked about it for the entire car ride home. Victoria sat in the waiting room during the appointment reading from her phone and eating a granola bar from her coat pocket, and when Emma came out she looked up and said, "How'd it go?" And Emma said, "She has a plant named Gerald," and Victoria said, "So does the plant have good insurance?" And Emma thought about this for a moment and then laughed, sudden and unguarded, the specific laugh of a child who'd found something genuinely funny. Logan, walking behind them, watched his daughter laugh with this person she'd known for 20 minutes, and the thing it did to him was not what he'd expected. It wasn't caution or protectiveness, though both were there. It was something quieter and more dangerous. It was the specific, unwanted recognition of something beginning. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing, and watched his daughter walk down the hospital corridor explaining the geological history of Manhattan to a billionaire who was listening with what appeared to be genuine interest, and he decided that he did not have time right now to examine what he was feeling. That, too, would have to wait. He was getting a lot of practice at waiting. The storage unit was in Queens, a climate-controlled facility on a street that smelled like diesel and old rain. Victoria had the key. She'd been carrying it on her keychain for 8 years without ever using it, which Logan noticed when she pulled it out Saturday morning. The key was shinier than the others, worn only by contact, not by use. She saw him notice. "I know," she said, and unlocked the unit. It was 9 in the morning. Gray outside, the specific heavy gray of a New York October that hasn't decided yet whether it wants to rain. Logan had dropped Emma at Mrs. Petrova's with a box of the old woman's favorite tea cookies as a thank you offering, and Emma had disappeared inside without ceremony, already talking about something she wanted to show the neighbor's cat. The unit was 10 by 10, boxes stacked 4 high against the back wall, maybe 30 of them, all in the same moving company's brown cardboard, labeled in a handwriting Logan didn't recognize. Victoria's, probably, from when she was 22 and clearing an apartment while grieving and operating on autopilot. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "You don't have to stay," Logan said. "I know." She stepped inside. They worked systematically, which was Logan's way and which Victoria adapted to without complaint. He opened, she identified. Most of what they found in the first hour was personal: clothing her father had kept, books, framed photographs, a golf trophy from 1994 that neither of them commented on. Victoria handled all of it with a careful neutrality that Logan recognized as the same neutrality he'd used clearing his mother's apartment. The mechanical efficiency of someone who has made the decision not to feel things on a schedule they can't control. But she wasn't entirely successful at it. At the 4th box, she stopped and held a photograph for a moment longer than the others. Logan, who was on the other side of the unit, didn't say anything. She set it down without comment and kept moving. He did make a mental note of what it had been. A family photo, Franklin Langford and a younger Victoria, somewhere warm, both squinting into bright sunlight. She'd maybe been 16. She'd looked, in the way teenagers sometimes do in old photos, like someone who hasn't yet decided who she's going to become. The business files were in the 7th box. Logan found them while Victoria was working through box 6, bundled with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age, sorted by year in accordion folders. He went straight to 1998 and 1999. Franklin Langford had been organized. The files were dense and detailed: project correspondence, investment memoranda, meeting notes. Logan went through them with the same flat, systematic attention he'd used on the security reports, reading for the one specific thing that didn't fit the pattern of everything else. He found it in a folder labeled Meridian, Q4 1999. Not a transaction record this time. A letter. Handwritten, on plain paper, no letterhead. Short, 3 paragraphs. Logan read it twice, then said, "Victoria." She came over. He held the letter out. She read it standing beside him, close enough that he could hear when her breathing changed. The letter was from Franklin Langford to someone identified only as RV. Initials, no name. The tone was tense and formal in the way that correspondence between people who have stopped trusting each other tends to be formal. The arrangement we agreed upon in March is no longer acceptable, the letter began. The Hayes matter has become an exposure risk that your handling has made worse, not better. If your intention was to resolve the situation cleanly, you have failed. I will not continue to provide cover for decisions I was not consulted on and did not authorize. Consider this notice that I am documenting everything from this point forward. The second paragraph was an account of a payment, a specific amount, a date, a reference to a project name, Harbor Point. The third paragraph was a warning. If anything happens to Hayes or to his family, I will ensure that the documentation reaches people who know how to use it. I am not bluffing. You know I am not bluffing. Victoria finished reading. She lowered the letter. The storage unit was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the street, a truck was reversing with that steady mechanical beep that becomes white noise in a city and then suddenly isn't. My father knew, she said. He knew about your father, Logan said, about what happened to him. He threatened to expose whoever RV is. She was still looking at the letter. And then my father died. Heart attack, they said. She paused. He was 54 and he ran 4 days a week, and he had no family history. Logan let that sit for a moment because it deserved the space. The Harbor Point project, he said. That's what my father found. Whatever it was connected to a project called Harbor Point, and in 1999, someone decided the exposure risk of him knowing about it was greater than the risk of removing him. He took the letter carefully and slid it into the folder he'd brought. Then your father tried to distance himself and became the same kind of risk. Victoria turned to face him. Her composure was intact, mostly. The seams showed at the corners, the jaw tight, the eyes doing something careful. RV, she said. Do you know who that is? Not yet. But you have an idea. He did have an idea. He'd had it since the night before, looking at the Meridian Holdings filing, running names, following the thread of who had been connected to Mills in the late 90s, and who had the kind of operational authority to order what had been ordered. But an idea wasn't a name he could put on paper yet, and putting it in the air too early was how things got back to the wrong people. Let me work on it, he said. She held his gaze for a moment with an expression that said she understood he wasn't withholding for no reason, and that she didn't like it, but she would accept it. We need to get this to federal investigators, she said. Soon. Not yet. Logan, the letter proves a cover-up and a payment, but it doesn't name the person at the top. If we go to the FBI right now, we get Mills. Maybe we get whoever RV is charged with something minor, and the structure above them closes ranks and walks. He met her eyes. I need one more piece. Just one. What piece? The Harbor Point project files. He closed the folder. Whatever my father found on that site, whatever was worth killing 2 people over, it's still somewhere. And if your father was keeping documentation, like he said he was, Victoria turned back to the boxes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she started pulling boxes from the stack with a focused, controlled energy that Logan recognized as the specific channel someone opens when they need to do something physical to manage what they're feeling. Help me with these, she said. They went through 11 more boxes in the next 2 hours. At the bottom of box 16, in a manila envelope taped to the inside of the cardboard flap, a hiding place so domestic and low-tech that it was almost invisible in its ordinariness, Victoria found a USB drive. She held it up. Logan looked at it. He said he was documenting everything, she said. Yeah. They looked at each other. I have a laptop in the car, she said. The files on the drive were encrypted, which was both expected and frustrating. Victoria's IT team could crack it, but that meant routing it through company systems, which Logan had specifically told her not to do. He sat in the car with the drive in his hand and thought about who he trusted. The answer, currently, was a short list. He called Priya. I need a favor, he said. Off the books. A pause. How off the books? Very, and I need to know if you have a problem with that before I tell you more. Another pause, slightly longer. He waited. Priya was 24 and worked in IT at a company that was apparently half riddled with people who'd been compromising it for years. And she'd come in at 7:30 in the morning and pulled information for a stranger without asking why, which suggested a kind of practical instincts that Logan found more reliable than credentials. "I don't have a problem with it," she said. "What do you need?" "Encrypted drive, well, old encryption, probably late 90s standard. Can you crack it?" "Give me a few hours." A pause. "Bring me coffee, the good kind, not the office kind." "Done." He met her at a coffee shop in Midtown at 2 in the afternoon, which was not in the Langford building and not on any route that connected to the Langford building. Victoria stayed in his car. Her choice, not his, made with the quick practical calculation of someone who understood that her face was recognizable, and his wasn't. Logan brought 2 cups of the coffee from the Brooklyn roaster that Victoria had told him about, and Priya took hers with the focused appreciation of someone for whom good coffee was a serious matter. She worked for 40 minutes on her personal laptop, which she'd brought in a bag along with 3 cables and a small device Logan didn't recognize. She didn't make conversation while she worked, which Logan appreciated. He drank his coffee and watched the coffee shop do its Saturday afternoon business and thought about Harbor Point. He'd looked it up the previous night. Harbor Point had been a large commercial development in Lower Manhattan, mid-90s construction, involving city contracts and multiple private investors. It had been completed in 1997 and had gone over budget by an amount significant enough to make some business pages at the time. The contractor of record was a firm called Carver Group. The project manager on record for a significant portion of the build was James Hayes. His father hadn't found something on the Harbor Point site. He'd been embedded in it. Whatever was wrong with Harbor Point, whatever warranted the cover-up, James Hayes had been close enough to see it from the inside. "Got it," Priya said. Logan looked up. She turned the laptop toward him. The drive contained 2 folders. The first was labeled Harbor Point, Documentation. The second was labeled 4V. He looked at that second label for a moment. 4V. Franklin Langford had hidden this drive in 1999 or 2000 and labeled a folder for his daughter, for Victoria, a daughter who'd been a teenager at the time and who wouldn't open these boxes for another 8 years and who, even then, hadn't opened them until now. He went to the car and got Victoria. She sat in the coffee shop across from Priya's laptop and read the Harbor Point folder while Logan stood at the counter with a second coffee, giving her space. He watched her face in the reflection of the window behind the counter. She read steadily, without visible expression, until she reached something in the middle of the folder, and then she stopped and went back and read it again. When she looked up, she found Logan's eyes in the reflection. He came back to the table. "What is it?" he said quietly. She turned the laptop slightly toward him, pointing to a specific file, a scanned memorandum dated November 1999. Logan read it. It took him about 90 seconds. When he looked up, he felt very still inside. The specific stillness that comes not from calm, but from the complete temporary shutdown of everything that isn't relevant to what's directly in front of you. The Harbor Point project had used substandard structural materials on a portion of the building, load-bearing sections specifically. The substitution had been deliberate, budgetary, and hidden in the contracting records through a system of falsified invoices and split billing. The estimated profit from the substitution, according to the memo, $4.7 million. The person who had authorized the substitution and designed the billing concealment, a senior executive at the project's primary investment firm. The executive's name was Raymond Voss. R.V. Raymond Voss, who in 1999 had been a vice president at a mid-sized investment firm and who was currently the chairman emeritus of Langford Capital Group's board of directors. The man who had been Carter Mills's mentor for 30 years. The man who had personally recommended that Victoria retain him as an advisory board member when she took over the company at 22, 6 weeks after her father died. He'd been inside the company the whole time. Logan sat down. "He's been on your board for 8 years, he said. He helped me build it." Her voice was very level, the kind of level that requires active maintenance. "When I took over the company at 22, I didn't know what I was doing. I was terrified. He was there. He mentored me. He was—" She stopped. "He was watching you," Logan said. Not unkindly. making sure you didn't find what your father had found. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, it was more measured. He's 73 years old. He's been in the industry for 50 years. He's respected. She caught herself. He was respected. He's been running a criminal network for 25 years, Logan said. From the inside of your company, using Mills as his operational arm and your board position as cover. The attempts on your life, he paused. You've been getting closer to this without knowing it. What have you been doing in the last year that might have been threatening to him? She looked at him. I've been auditing the company's historical investment records. Full archive audit. I started it last January. It was supposed to be a routine governance exercise. It wasn't routine to him. No. Her jaw tightened. He's been trying to kill me because I was about to find his accounting in my own company's records. And your father's death. Logan chose his words carefully. Your father tried to back out of the arrangement. He threatened to document everything. Voss, RV, arrange for it to look like a heart attack. He's done this before. The sentence landed between them. Victoria absorbed it. My father wasn't perfect, she said after a moment. He was part of it initially. He took the arrangement. She looked down at the table. And then he tried to stop it. And then he tried to stop it, Logan agreed. She looked up. Her eyes were dry and her voice was steady, and he had the sense that she was experiencing something enormous and had made the decision not to do that right now, here, in a midtown coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon, with Priya sitting 2 feet away very carefully, reading something on her phone that she clearly wasn't reading. What do we do? Victoria said. Logan looked at the folder labeled 4V on the screen, at the memo with Raymond Voss's name on it, at the scanned records of $4.7 million and a building that had been compromised in 1997 and the people who'd known about it and been killed or paid or threatened into silence. We set a trap, he said. The plan took 2 weeks to construct. 2 weeks of very careful, very quiet work, during which Logan continued to appear in the Langford Capital offices at normal hours doing apparently normal things. And Victoria continued to run her company with apparently normal composure, and Raymond Voss continued to attend board meetings and make thoughtful recommendations and look like an elder statesman of the investment world, which he had been doing for 40 years and was quite good at. During those 2 weeks, certain other things happened. Emma's procedure date was confirmed, 2 weeks out from when Logan had last checked. Dr. Chen called him on a Thursday evening while he was on his way home and used the phrase very optimistic prognosis, and Logan sat on a bench on Amsterdam Avenue for 10 minutes afterward because he didn't trust his legs to work normally while he was processing it. He texted Victoria. Chen called. Good news on Emma. The response came back in 30 seconds. I know. She called me too to confirm the arrangements. How are you? He looked at that last part for a moment. How are you? 3 words that most people asked without meaning as a question, and she'd asked as a question. Working on it, he texted back. Her reply, fair enough. During those 2 weeks, Logan also had a conversation with Diane Reyes, the head of legal, which he'd been putting off because Diane Reyes was one of the names Victoria had given him as someone who'd known about Patty's diner that morning, and he hadn't been able to eliminate her from consideration. He met her in her office on a Wednesday and spent 20 minutes talking with her about what appeared to be routine security protocol questions. And in that 20 minutes, he became reasonably confident that Diane Reyes was exactly what she appeared to be. A careful, intelligent lawyer who had been operating in a compromised environment without knowing it, and who, if she'd inadvertently given any information to the wrong person, had done so through a channel she didn't know was monitored. The monitored channel turned out to be her email, which Priya found evidence of in an archived server log, incoming traffic from an external address that was routing through a proxy that Voss's team had apparently set up 18 months ago. They'd been reading Diane's email. They'd known about Patty's because Diane had emailed a colleague about rescheduling a morning meeting and mentioned that Victoria would be in that neighborhood the following morning. Nobody had betrayed Victoria. She'd been betrayed by the infrastructure around her, built piece by piece over 8 years by someone who had understood, from the beginning, exactly what he was doing. Logan told Victoria this on a Thursday evening in her office. The same French press, the same 2 cups. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. I've been suspicious of Diane for 2 weeks, she said. I know. She's worked for me for 5 years. She stopped. I've been cold to her. You can fix that. I know I can fix it. That's not. She set down her cup. I've been managing everyone around me at arm's length for 2 weeks because I didn't know who to trust, and it turns out it was nobody's fault and I was just a short, controlled exhale. Being paranoid in a way that was making everyone miserable. You were being careful in a situation that required it, Logan said. There's a version of careful that looks exactly like paranoid from the outside. She looked at him. You knew it wasn't Diane. I was pretty sure. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be certain first, and because he hesitated. Because you're the kind of person who acts on information. If I'd told you before I was sure, you'd have cleared her and someone watching might have known I was investigating Diane specifically. It was safer for her if you kept your distance a little longer. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You were protecting Diane by keeping me in the dark. Not in the dark, just managing the timing. That's the same thing. Yeah, he admitted. It is. She picked up her coffee. Don't do that again. Understood. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind that has furniture in it. The trap, she said. Tell me again how it works. Logan had been refining the mechanics for 10 days with Ames, who had turned out to be a more flexible thinker than his initial presentation suggested. The plan was structured around a simple principle. To catch someone who'd been invisible for 25 years, you had to give them something visible to react to. They were going to let Voss find out that the documentation existed. Not all of it. Not the USB drive, not the Harbor Point memo, but a carefully placed suggestion routed through a channel Voss's team was monitoring that Victoria had found something in her father's storage and was planning to turn it over to federal investigators at a specific time and place. The specific time and place was the private vault room of a trust bank on Park Avenue, where Langford Capital maintained certain historical records, a room with controlled access, with security cameras, and where 2 federal investigators who Ames had contacted through a channel entirely outside the company's communications infrastructure would be waiting. The risk was that Voss would send the same kind of people he'd been sending, that it would become the 4th attempt on Victoria's life, in a bank vault on Park Avenue, which was not a scenario that had any version Logan liked. He was going to be in the building, armed this time, with a permit that Ames had expedited through channels Logan didn't ask too carefully about, and there would be building security and the 2 federal agents. Victoria would be the visible presence. Logan would be the invisible one. He'll send professionals, Logan said. I know. And it's possible he comes himself. If he thinks the documentation is specific enough to put him away, he might want to be there. Is that likely? Men who've been running things for 25 years sometimes want to handle the final problem personally. He paused. It's a control thing. The same reason he put himself on your board. He wanted to see it, manage it, be close to it. Victoria looked at the window. Midtown evening, lights beginning. He came to my father's funeral, she said. He held my hand. He told me Franklin was a good man. She was quiet for a moment. I thanked him. There was nothing Logan could say to that would help, so he didn't say anything. She turned back to him. Thursday, she said. Let's do it Thursday. That's 3 days. I know how calendars work, Logan. He almost smiled. Thursday. The planted information went in through Diane's email account, with Diane's knowledge and cooperation, which Victoria gave her on Wednesday in a conversation that reportedly lasted an hour and ended with both of them exhausted, and Diane, according to Victoria's account, saying I always thought Mills made my skin crawl for no reason in a tone of vindicated discomfort. They wrote the email together. A message from Diane to an outside counsel mentioning that Victoria had been reviewing items from her father's estate and had discovered financial documentation she was concerned about, and that she was planning to have it reviewed by federal counsel Thursday morning in the Park Avenue vault. Specific enough to be credible, vague enough to require someone to show up in person to understand exactly what had been found. Wednesday night, Logan went home and made dinner and helped Emma with a project about ecosystems. She'd chosen the ocean and had very strong opinions about the role of bioluminescent organisms. and put her to bed at 8:30 and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and didn't think about Thursday, or tried not to. He was moderately successful, which was about as well as he could expect. His phone buzzed at 10. Victoria, are you sleeping? Not yet. Me neither. A pause, then, can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you came back from the Navy, what was the hardest part? He looked at the question for a moment. It was the kind of question people didn't usually ask him because it required them to be prepared for a real answer. Not the things you'd expect, he typed. Not the nightmares or the hypervigilance or any of the clinical things. The hardest part was figuring out what I was for. When the purpose is gone, you don't know what shape you are anymore. A long pause. I think I know what that feels like, she wrote. After my father died. After I started the company. I knew what I was building, but I didn't know why anymore. I kept moving because stopping felt dangerous. It is dangerous, he wrote. Stopping is where you find out what's actually true. Another pause. Longer. What's true for you right now? He sat with that for a while. The apartment quiet, Emma asleep, the glass of water on the table going warm. That I've been hiding from a version of myself that was actually useful, he finally wrote, and that I have a daughter who deserves a father who isn't just surviving. He sent it before he could think too carefully about it. Her reply came back after a minute. For what it's worth, I think you're more than surviving, even when you're trying not to be. He set the phone down. He sat there for a while. Then he picked it up and wrote, Get some sleep. Thursday's going to be a long day. Her reply, You too. Don't be late. You stole that from Emma. She's a wise child. He put the phone face down on the table and went to bed. And he didn't exactly sleep well, but he slept better than he'd expected. Thursday morning arrived with cold, clear light and the kind of sharp October air that makes Manhattan look like it's been recently cleaned. Logan was at the Park Avenue building at 7:15, 3 hours before the scheduled time, because 3 hours was how long it took him to know a building well enough to operate in it. He walked every floor accessible to him, every stairwell, every entry and exit. He found the vault room on the 3rd floor, a room built for financial security, not physical security, which meant good locks and cameras, but predictable lines of approach. He noted all of it. The 2 federal agents arrived at 8. A woman named Carver, who was compact and direct and shook his hand with the efficiency of someone who'd long stopped performing pleasantness she didn't feel, and a man named DeLuca, who was quieter and had the patience of someone who'd done a great deal of surveillance. Logan talked with them for 20 minutes. They were skeptical about the plan in specific ways, concerned about using Victoria as visible bait in a space that couldn't be fully controlled. And Logan listened to their objections and agreed with most of them and explained why, in this specific case, this was still the best option. Carver looked at him for a moment after he finished and said, "You're not currently federal anything, are you?" And Logan said, "No." And she said, "Right," in a tone that wasn't quite disapproval and wasn't quite respect, and he decided it was somewhere workable between the two. Victoria arrived at 9:30 with Ames and Diane Reyes and a lawyer whose name Logan immediately forgot. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair pulled back, and she had the look of someone who'd slept adequately and was in full operational mode. The version of her that Logan had started to recognize as the one she put on like armor before things got hard. She found him in the hallway outside the vault room and stopped. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. "How bad is it going to be?" He looked at her. Somewhere between fine and not fine. Specific. "The building's clean. The exits are covered. The agents are good. If Voss's people come—" He paused. "He'll send professionals, like I said. And professionals aren't stupid. They'll be cautious. That's actually better for us than amateurs who panic. And if Voss comes himself, then we get everything at once." She held his gaze. "Stay close," she said. "That was the plan." "I know, I'm just—" She paused. "Saying it out loud." He nodded. She went into the vault room. Logan positioned himself in the small service corridor 40 feet down the hall, with a sight line to the vault room door and to both ends of the corridor, and settled in to wait. Waiting was the part that people who'd never done it imagined was peaceful. It wasn't. It was the part where your body ran every permutation of what could go wrong. And your job was not to argue with it, but to keep it from making decisions ahead of schedule. At 10:40, one of DeLuca's people on the ground floor texted, 2 vehicles, 4 individuals, entering the building. Logan pressed himself further into the service corridor. He could see the corridor to the vault room. He texted Victoria, "They're here. Stay in the room." Her reply came back in 5 seconds, "Staying." The 4 individuals came off the elevator at 10:46. Logan recognized one of them immediately, Graybeard from Patty's Diner, which answered the question of how seriously Voss was taking this. Graybeard didn't look like he was improvising. He moved with the same deliberate, unhurried quality he'd had in the diner, and the 3 people with him were clearly capable in the same general category as the men Logan had put on the floor 2 weeks ago. But there were 4 of them now, and Logan was one, and the federal agents were inside the vault room with Victoria. He made the calculation in about 3 seconds. He texted Carver, 4 incoming, 20 seconds. Then Graybeard saw him. Not because Logan had moved, because Graybeard was good at his job, and some people have a specific awareness of spaces that isn't trained so much as native, and Graybeard stopped at the end of the corridor and looked toward the service alcove, and his expression did something small and controlled. "Patty's," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was more like a fact he was cataloging. "Yeah," Logan said. "You're working for her." "Correct." Graybeard looked at him with that chess player assessment again. "You're in the way." "That's kind of the job." What happened next was not orderly. 4 people with a specific objective and a man in a service corridor between them and it. The math was simple, and everyone in the hallway understood it simultaneously. Graybeard gestured, a small, specific movement, and the 2 men on his left moved forward. Logan moved first. He came out of the service alcove to the right, away from the direction the 2 men expected, using the shift in angle to close with the nearer one before the geometry of the approach had time to adjust. He was aware, distantly, of the specific effort it cost him this time. He was 32, not 22, and the cheekbone that had been hit in Patty's Diner was still faintly sensitive, and he was carrying a weapon he hadn't used yet because the corridor was too tight to use it without risk of hitting the wrong person. The man he reached first was better than the men from the diner. He absorbed the initial contact without going down and threw a counter that Logan had to use both arms to redirect, losing his balance for a fraction of a second. They went sideways into the wall. Logan felt the impact through his shoulder and used it, pushing off the wall to change the angle, and caught the man behind the knee on the way through. Behind him, the 3rd man was moving. Logan heard the footstep pattern and dropped his weight without turning, felt the arm go over his head, stood up into it, and heard something that sounded like a strained ligament, and then the man was pulling back. 2 down, or at least 2 occupied. He turned. Graybeard was at the vault room door. He hadn't engaged with Logan at all. He'd sent his men forward as a separation tactic, standard, professional, effective, and had used the 30 seconds it bought him to cross the corridor. He was reaching for the door handle. Logan was 20 feet away. He drew the weapon. "Don't," he said. Graybeard turned slowly. He had his own weapon out. It had been out, Logan realized, since he'd cleared the end of the corridor, and he'd just been waiting for the moment to use it. He looked at Logan. Logan looked at him. "You shoot me," Graybeard said. "They hear it in there. They'll know it's over. They'll move her before—" "They're not going to move her," Logan said, "because there are 2 federal agents in that room and you are done." A pause. "My employer," Graybeard started. "Raymond Voss," Logan said. The name landed. Something moved in Graybeard's face, surprise, quickly controlled, then something else. Something that looked, oddly, like relief. Like a man who had been carrying a thing for a long time and had just been told someone else knew the weight of it. "You know who he is?" Graybeard said. "I know everything about him, and so do the people in that room." The 2 men Logan had engaged were getting back up. He was aware of this peripherally. None of this was good. What happened in the next 30 seconds was going to be whatever it was going to be, and Logan had the specific, terrible clarity of someone who has removed all options except the immediate one. And then the vault room door opened. Carver came out first. Federal credentials out, weapon drawn, voice like a wall. "FBI, Nobody moves, hands where I can see them. DeLuca was a step behind her, and then from the other end of the corridor, the ground floor agents who'd followed the four men up came off the stairwell. Graybeard looked at his options. Then he lowered the weapon and set it on the floor. His men followed. It was over, or the immediate part of it was, and Logan stood in the corridor with his weapon up and his shoulder aching where he'd hit the wall, and the particular adrenaline come down beginning in his hands that meant they wanted to shake, and he was not letting them. Victoria came out of the vault room. She looked at the four men on the floor being cuffed by Carver's people. She looked at Logan. She crossed the corridor to him and stopped about 2 feet away. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down. He was, from a cut above his eyebrow that he hadn't noticed getting. "Little bit. We have a medical thing with you and diners and now hallways. It's a consistent problem," he agreed. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. He'd stopped trying to name all her expressions. There were too many and they moved too fast, and she'd gotten, in the past 2 weeks, more visible to him than he'd expected. More visible than was probably strategic. "Graybeard," he said. He reacted to Voss's name. He's not fully on board with what he's been doing. "You think he'll cooperate?" "I think someone should talk to him before Carver processes him." She turned to find Carver, who was already looking at Logan with an expression of professional assessment. Logan met it. "The man with the gray beard," he said. "Give me 5 minutes with him before booking." Carver looked at him for a long moment. "You're not federal anything," she said for the second time. 5 minutes, he said. "I'll tell you everything that comes out of it." She considered this with the visible reluctance of someone doing a calculation they're not pleased about. 3 minutes, she said. Graybeard's name turned out to be Marcus Hale. He was 51, former private security, and had been working for Raymond Voss's network for 9 years. At first in what he'd been told were legitimate corporate security operations, and then, by increments, in things that were not. Logan sat across from him in a chair someone had dragged into the corridor, and Marcus Hale sat with his hands cuffed in front of him and looked at Logan with the expression of a man who had made a decision sometime in the last 5 minutes and was inhabiting it. "You sent the document," Logan said. It wasn't a question. He'd arrived at it sometime in the last 30 seconds. The relief on Hale's face when Logan said Voss's name, the odd quality of the gray-bearded man at Patty's, who had chosen to walk out instead of escalate, who had specifically chosen not to take the shot in the diner when he could have. "I have a daughter," Hale said. Logan looked at him. "She's 9, Hale said, "and I've been doing things I can't look at her and—" He stopped, steadied himself. "I sent the document because I needed someone to know, someone who would actually move on it, not just—" He looked at his hands. "I didn't know about you. I didn't know her father was connected to your father. I only knew the Langford name was on Voss's list as a problem, and the document was a way to—" He paused. "Start something that I couldn't start myself. Because you couldn't go to the FBI without implicating yourself. 9 years of things I can't undo." He looked up. "But I can tell you where Voss is right now." Logan went still. "Where?" "He doesn't trust anything to hold. That's how he stayed invisible for 25 years. He has a contingency location, a building he owns through 4 shells in New Jersey. He goes there when an operation is in motion." A pause. "He'll be there now, watching his phone, waiting to hear that this worked." Logan stood up. Carver was already listening. She'd been listening from 6 feet away because 3 minutes was 3 minutes and she'd spent them productively. She met Logan's eyes. "We'll need everything you just said in a formal statement," she told Hale. Then she turned to Logan. "New Jersey's federal jurisdiction. You are still not—" "Federal anything," Logan said. "I know. I'll wait here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she got on her phone. Logan walked back to where Victoria was standing and told her what Hale had said. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He's been there the whole time. 9 years. Right there. Yeah. Running this. Managing the attempts. Making decisions about who lives and—" She stopped. "He's 73 years old, and he's been making those decisions from New Jersey and coming to my board meetings and talking about quarterly projections." "It's over," Logan said. "Or it will be." She looked at him. You're sure? He thought about Hale's statement, about the documentation from the USB drive, about the paper trail of 25 years that Carver's team was about to walk into. He thought about Raymond Voss sitting in a building in New Jersey, waiting for a phone call that was not going to come. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. She nodded once. Then she looked at his forehead. You're still bleeding, she said. I know. Can you please deal with that? In a minute. Logan? In a minute. He looked at her. Are you all right? She seemed to consider whether to deflect. She decided against it. Not entirely, she said, but I will be. It was such a simple, honest answer that he didn't add anything to it. Sometimes things that are true don't need company. Carver's team reached the New Jersey location at 2:17 in the afternoon. Raymond Voss was there, as Hale had said he'd be. Seated at a desk, phone in hand, a man who had been waiting for control to reassert itself and had finally, after 25 years, run out of runway. Logan got the call from Carver at 2:43. He was sitting in the bank's small lobby with a bandage over his eyebrow that a paramedic had applied and that Emma was going to have questions about, and Victoria was beside him on the bench with her coat on her lap, both of them saying very little, in the way of two people who have been through a great deal of adrenaline and are now on the other side of it. He answered, listened, said, "Thank you," and hung up. He turned to Victoria. "They have him," he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. Then she opened them. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady and a little rough and completely real. "Okay." They sat there on the bench in the lobby of a Park Avenue bank on a clear Thursday in October, and outside the city went on being the city, and neither of them said anything for a while, and that was exactly right. The days after Raymond Voss's arrest had a strange, deflated quality that Logan hadn't anticipated. He'd expected relief, clean and immediate, the way you expect daylight after a long night. What he got instead was something more complicated. The specific disorientation of a person whose body has been running on threat response for weeks and doesn't know how to stop. He slept badly the first 3 nights. Not from nightmares, just from the absence of the particular alertness that had been his constant companion since the morning in Patty's diner. His body was still checking exits, still cataloging rooms, still doing all the automatic calculations that have no target anymore, like a machine that hasn't been told to turn off. Emma noticed on the second morning. "You made the eggs weird," she said, looking at her plate. "The eggs are fine. They're too done. You always make them the right amount of done." She looked up at him. "Are you tired?" "A little." "Because of work?" "Yeah. The work part is finished. I just need to catch up on sleep." She considered this with the unsettling diagnostic accuracy she'd been applying to him since she was 4 years old. "Okay," she finally said, "but you should make the eggs the right way tomorrow." "I'll do my best," Logan said. "That's not the same as saying you will." "Emma." "What?" "Eat your eggs." She ate her eggs, and Logan stood at the kitchen counter with his coffee and looked out the window at the November morning and thought about what came next. It was a question he'd been avoiding because the immediate problem had consumed all available attention for weeks. And now the immediate problem was over, and the question was right there, unavoidable, with nowhere to hide. What Voss's arrest set in motion was not simple or quick. Federal investigations of this scale rarely were. Carver's team spent the first week pulling records, the Harbor Point documentation from the USB drive, the financial trails from Meridian Strategic Holdings, the 25 years of paper that Voss had generated and hidden, and that Hale's cooperation was now helping to unravel layer by layer. Carter Mills was arrested on a Tuesday morning at his apartment on the Upper East Side, which Logan knew because Ames sent him a text that said simply, "Mills, this morning." And Logan had sat with that for a while and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite sorrow, but was in the neighborhood of both. Hale, Marcus Hale, Graybeard, the man who had sent the document and then spent 9 months trying to find a way to stop what he'd helped build, was cooperating fully. His lawyer had negotiated a framework with federal prosecutors that Logan wasn't privy to, but Carver had told him, in the particular way that Carver communicated things she didn't have to communicate, that Hale's cooperation was substantial and that it was going to make the case significantly stronger. Logan thought about a man with a 9-year-old daughter who had looked at his hands in a hallway and said, "I've been doing things I can't undo," and he didn't feel like he could judge the math of it. He'd seen enough people make impossible choices to know that the choices themselves were never the whole story. Victoria, in the weeks after the arrest, did what Logan had come to understand she did under pressure. She worked, not escapism. She was processing. She was grieving in her own way the specific loss of a man she'd trusted and the knowledge of what that trust had cost her father. But she processed by moving. Board restructuring, executive review, the careful architectural work of pulling apart what had been built wrong and figuring out what underneath it was still sound. She fired 6 people in 2 weeks. Not impulsively. She did it with documentation and legal counsel and the deliberate care of someone who understood that this moment would define what the company became next. Logan knew about each one before it happened because she told him, usually in the evening by phone, running her reasoning past him in the specific way she'd started doing in the last weeks of the investigation. Not asking for approval. She didn't need it and wouldn't have wanted it framed that way. More like thinking out loud with someone she trusted to be honest when she was wrong. He was wrong once about one of the executives she'd kept. He told her. There was a pause on the phone. "His record is clean," she said. "His record is clean because Voss's network was careful about who it visibly touched. But he was in the room for the Q2 meeting in 2022, where Voss pushed the board to reject the archive audit proposal." Logan had gone back through meeting minutes. It was the kind of thing you could find if you knew what you were looking for. He voted yes on Voss's recommendation, twice. A lot of people voted yes on Voss's recommendations. He was chairman emeritus. The other people who voted yes on both of those specific proposals are already gone. He paused. "It's your call. I'm telling you what I see." Another pause, longer. "I'll pull his access pending review," she said. "That's probably right. Don't be smug about it." "I'm not being smug." Your voice was doing the smug thing. "I don't have a smug voice." "You have a very subtle smug voice," she said, "and I've been listening to it for 6 weeks, so I know." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Fair enough." She almost laughed. He could hear it in the breath. "Good night, Logan." "Good night." He put the phone down and sat at his kitchen table for a while in the comfortable dark. The federal case was building on its own momentum now, and Logan was no longer central to it. Carver's team had what they needed, and they were professional and methodical and didn't require his involvement, which was both correct and slightly strange. The odd, sideways feeling of a chapter ending that you've been so deep inside that you'd stopped being able to see it as a chapter. He filed a formal statement, sat through 2 debriefs, and answered every question Carver asked with the same complete honesty he'd brought to the whole thing. Carver, for her part, had shifted from skeptical to something that resembled, if not warmth, then at least respect at operating temperature. She called him once, about 3 weeks in, for clarification on something from his debrief, and at the end of the call, she said, "For the record, the hallway situation was well handled," which Logan suspected was the closest she came to a compliment, and accepted it accordingly. The question of James Hayes was a separate thread, and the one that moved more slowly, in the way that matters involving old deaths always move slowly, because the people involved are gone, and the records are partial, and the urgency that exists for the living doesn't reach back far enough to make the dead feel immediate. The federal investigators opened a review of his father's death based on the information in the Harbor Point files, and Hale's testimony about Voss's operational history. Logan was told this by a different agent, a quieter man named Sorensen who handled older case reviews, and who had the particular patient manner of someone who spent his professional life explaining to families that things moved at the speed they moved, and not faster. "We can't promise a conclusion," Sorensen told him. They were sitting in a federal building on a Tuesday afternoon, in a small room with fluorescent lighting and a table with water bottles nobody had opened. "We can promise that it's going to be examined properly." "That's enough," Logan said. Sorensen looked at him. "Some families aren't satisfied with that." "I know, but examined properly is what he deserved and didn't get. That's the part that was missing." Logan looked at the water bottle he hadn't opened. "My father knew what he'd found on that project was wrong. He tried to do something about it. He just didn't have enough room to maneuver. He paused. Getting the truth on record is not nothing. Sorensen nodded once. No, he agreed. It's not. Logan left the federal building and walked for a while in the November cold because the air helped and because he needed to be moving. He walked 3 blocks north and then stopped on the sidewalk outside a dry cleaner and pulled out his phone and looked at his contacts and almost called his mother before remembering, with the specific jolt that never entirely went away after 6 years, that he couldn't. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then he put the phone in his pocket and walked to the subway and went home to his daughter. Emma's surgery was on a Friday. Dr. Chen's team at the hospital was as straightforward and competent as she'd been at every appointment. No theater, just careful medical work performed by people who did it regularly and well. Logan sat in a waiting room for 4 hours that were the specific texture of waiting rooms everywhere, the particular timelessness of them, the way they remove you from the ordinary rhythm of hours and replace it with something slower and more internal. Victoria came. She didn't announce it. He got a text at 9:15, in the waiting room, brought coffee. And when he came down from the surgical floor, she was in the corner in a chair that was clearly uncomfortable, wearing jeans and a sweater that was not the office version of her, with 2 cups of coffee from the Brooklyn roaster and a paper bag that turned out to contain a sandwich he hadn't asked for, but discovered upon receiving it that he very much needed. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." She handed him the coffee. "How long?" "Maybe 2 more hours." She settled back in the chair. "Then sit down." He sat. They didn't talk for a while, and the not talking was one of those silences that has its own character. Not absence, just 2 people in a room with something important happening in the floor above them, and neither of them filling the space with noise because the space didn't require it. At one point, Logan said, "She told me this morning that Gerald would be fine because stuffed animals don't need heart surgery." Victoria smiled, a real one, not the thin professional kind. "She's not wrong. She told me she would be fine for the same reason, that she was basically a stuffed animal in terms of durability." "That's actually very good logic." "It is," he said. "I didn't tell her that." Victoria looked at him with that expression he'd stopped trying to categorize, the one that was measuring and warm in equal proportion, like an equation that keeps resolving to the same answer no matter how you rearrange it. "She's going to be okay," Victoria said. Not a platitude, a statement. "Yeah." He looked at his coffee cup. "She is." Dr. Chen came down at 11:42 with the expression of a surgeon who has completed a procedure successfully and is delivering that information in the understated way of someone who does this regularly and therefore doesn't dress it up. "She's out. Everything went as expected. She'll be in recovery for a few hours and we want to keep her overnight, but the repair is clean." She paused. "She asked me, before she went under, if Gerald could come up. I told her he'd have to wait. She accepted this, but she wanted it on record that she felt it was unfair." Logan stood up, and the standing up required a moment because his legs were unsteady in a way he hadn't planned for. He put a hand on the back of the chair. "You can go up in about 30 minutes, Dr. Chen said." She left. Logan stood with his hand on the back of the plastic chair and did not say anything for a moment. Victoria stood beside him and didn't say anything either, which was exactly the correct thing to do. Then she put her hand over his on the chair back, just for a second. Then she took it away and picked up her coffee cup and said, 30 minutes. Sit down." He sat down. 32 minutes later, he was in the recovery room with Emma, who was drowsy and small and wearing a hospital gown that was too big and holding a very contented opinion about the ceiling tiles, which she'd been examining and found adequate. Logan sat beside her bed and held her hand, the small, specific weight of it in his palm. And she looked at him sideways with those dark eyes and said, "I was right. I'm fine." "You were right," he said. "I'm very durable. The most durable." She seemed satisfied with this confirmation. She drifted for a while and then came back and said, with the specific directness of a child who has no interest in working up to things, "Is Victoria going to keep coming around?" Logan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "She came to the hospital." "She did." "She didn't have to." "No, she didn't." Emma thought about this. "I like her," she said. It was the tone she used for facts. Not preference, not hope. Just the statement of something she'd assessed and determined to be true. She listened to the whole thing about Manhattan schist. Most adults stop listening after a little bit. She's a good listener. And she said Gerald was a good name for the plant. She did say that. Emma's eyes were getting heavy again. You should keep being her friend, she said, almost asleep. She probably doesn't have enough real ones. She was under before Logan could respond, and he sat beside her in the recovery room and thought about what a 6-year-old had just correctly diagnosed in about 90 seconds. And he looked at the ceiling tiles that Emma had found adequate, and he thought about what it meant to let something be true that you'd been very carefully not admitting for a while. He stayed until she was properly sleeping. Then he went back to the waiting room. Victoria was still there, working from her phone, her sandwich untouched. She looked up when he came in. All good? All good. He sat down. She said to tell you that Gerald the plant was a good call. Victoria looked at her phone for a moment, and then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that happened before a person had time to decide whether to, and it changed the whole quality of her face. She's a good kid, Victoria said. Yeah, Logan said. She's the best thing I ever did. The pause that followed was comfortable and slightly charged in a way that neither of them addressed, and Logan drank his cold coffee and let it be what it was. The week after Emma came home from the hospital was the kind of week that felt, at least on the surface, almost normal. Emma was on restricted activity. No running, no excessive excitement, follow-up appointments twice in the next month. And she handled this with the philosophical resignation of a person who understood that the rules existed for reasons and would comply, while making it quietly clear that she was doing so under protest. She spent a lot of time on the couch with Gerald and her coloring supplies, developing increasingly detailed theories about bioluminescent deep-sea creatures. Logan cooked and did laundry and answered emails and made appointments and did the small machinery of daily life that never actually stops regardless of what else is happening. And in between all of this, he sat with the strange new quietness of a situation that had been loud for 2 months and was now, finally, mostly still. Victoria called on Wednesday evening. I've been thinking, she said. About what? About the company. About what I want to rebuild it into. A pause. And about you. In what order? He said. The company first, because that's what I'm allowed to think clearly about. You, another pause. You're harder. He didn't say anything because she was clearly working her way toward something, and interrupting would have been both rude and counterproductive. I want to create a security division, she said. Not the kind I had before. Not a name on an org chart and a team that was being quietly managed by someone working against us. A real one. Independent, small, reporting directly to me. She paused. I want you to run it. Logan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the kitchen, at Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, at the grocery list on the counter, at the 2 plates he'd washed and left on the drying rack. It would mean leaving the hardware stores, he said. I'd expect so. And the weekend deliveries. Logan, I'm serious. Those are my supplemental income streams. I'm aware, she said, and there was something in her voice that was somewhere between affection and exasperation, which he'd learned was a register she used specifically for him. The compensation is, it's better than 2 hardware stores and weekend deliveries. Significantly. What does significantly mean? She told him. He was quiet for a long moment. That's... He stopped. Yes, she said. Victoria. It's what the job is worth. Don't make it strange. A pause. I need someone I trust. I'm not good at trusting people, as we've established, and the list of people I trust is short enough that I can count it without using both hands. You're on it. That has value. I'm on a list that doesn't require both hands. I'm saying you're someone I rely on. Accept it with grace. He leaned against the kitchen counter. I want to set the parameters myself. Who I hire, how the division operates, no interference on methodology. Agreed. And I'm not moving Emma's school. I wouldn't ask you to. And I need to be able to... He stopped, reorganizing. If Emma needs something, appointments, school things, I need to be able to... Logan, her voice was quiet. I've met Emma. I know what she needs. That's not something you have to negotiate. He stood in his kitchen in the November evening with the phone against his ear and felt something shift in his chest that was large and quiet and had been a long time coming. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll take it? Okay, I'll take it. A pause. Thank you. You protected my life, she said, and you found the truth about your father and mine in the process. I think the accounting works in your favor. That's not what I'm thanking you for. A silence. I know, she said. You're welcome. The legal proceedings against Raymond Voss began taking their public shape in early December. Federal indictment on charges that included conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and with Hale's testimony providing the connective tissue, charges related to the deaths of James Hayes and Franklin Langford. Sorensen called Logan when the Langford and Hayes charges were formally added and read him the specific language, which Logan wrote down on his legal pad in full and then sat looking at for a while. It was not a verdict. The trial would be months away, possibly longer. Voss's legal team was formidable and expensive and would do what formidable, expensive legal teams do, which was complicate and delay and challenge every piece of evidence while trying to introduce enough ambiguity to compromise the jury's confidence. Logan understood this. He'd spoken to his own lawyer about what to expect, and his lawyer had been honest in the direct way that good lawyers are when they're not trying to sell you comfort. This is a strong case, she'd said. Strong cases don't always win quickly. I know, Logan had said. I just need it in the record. What do you mean? I mean that whether or not a jury convicts Raymond Voss in the timeline I'd prefer, the documentation exists now. The federal charges exist. My father's name is in those charges connected to what actually happened to him. He'd paused. Nobody can make that not true anymore. That's what I needed. His lawyer had looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between professional assessment and something more personal. That's a mature way to think about it, she said. I've had some time, he said, to figure out what I actually need versus what I want. The charges against Carter Mills were resolved faster. He cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence, not Hale's level of cooperation, but enough to be useful, and the cooperation revealed several details about Voss's network that filled gaps Carver's team had been working on for weeks. Logan felt no particular anger about the deal. Mills had been a connector, an enabler, someone who opened doors for someone more powerful and looked away from what went through them. The damage he'd done was real, but it was borrowed damage, and the source of it was facing consequences that no amount of legal maneuvering was likely to avoid entirely. The company Carter Mills had controlled within Langford Capital, a subsidiary investment vehicle that had been quietly directing certain decisions for years, was dissolved. Victoria announced it in an internal memo that Logan read in his new office on the 39th floor, an office he'd officially occupied for 2 weeks, and that still had the squeaky chair. He hadn't replaced it. He wasn't sure why. Some small stubbornness about things that worked even imperfectly. Diane Reyes came to his office on a Thursday afternoon, knocked on the open door, and stood in the doorway with a coffee cup and the expression of someone who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. You figured out it wasn't me, she said. Yeah. And you told Victoria? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. She was cold to me for 2 weeks. You knew the whole time it wasn't me, and she was cold for 2 weeks because you were managing the investigation. I told you it was... I know why, she said. I'm not angry. I'm just... She came in and sat in the chair across from his desk, which she did without being invited, and he didn't mind. I want to understand how you think, because I've been in this company for 5 years and I didn't see any of it. I didn't see Mills. I didn't see Voss. She looked at her coffee cup. I should have seen something. Voss was very good, Logan said. People who've been hiding things for 25 years get very good at looking like what they're not. That's generous. It's accurate. You're not paid to detect long-term infiltration. You're paid to practice law. And you're paid to see things. Now I am, he said. Before this, I was paid to stock shelves and deliver lumber. She almost smiled. How did you end up here? Breakfast in the wrong diner. That's going to be the story people tell. Probably. She looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality that Logan had noticed in her from the beginning. A lawyer's habit, reading the gap between what's said and what's meant. She trusts you, Diane said. Victoria, I've worked with her for 5 years and I've watched her trust maybe 3 people in that time. And all 3 of them she held at a specific distance even while trusting them. She paused. She doesn't do that with you. Logan looked at the window. She knows I'm not going to use it. The trust? Or the distance? Diane considered this. Then she nodded once, the way people nod when a thing they'd suspected has been confirmed without being quite said. Okay, she said, and stood up. Good talk. You came to my office. I did. She moved to the door. The chair squeaks, by the way. I know. You should get a new one. I'm thinking about it. She left. Logan turned back to the papers on his desk, which were the structural documents for the new security division. Staffing, protocols, the careful architecture of something built from scratch, with the specific intention of not replicating the errors of what came before. He'd spent 3 days on it, and had strong opinions about parts of it and uncertainty about others, which was the honest condition of someone building something they cared about. The holidays arrived with the particular insistence of the holidays, refusing to be reduced to background regardless of what else was happening. Emma had opinions about decorations, which she expressed at length and with visual aids in the form of drawings, and Logan spent a Saturday afternoon putting up lights on a budget that was, for the first time in 3 years, not a source of active anxiety. He stood on the small stepladder in the living room, wrestling with a string of lights that had developed a philosophical disagreement with the window frame, and Emma sat below him directing the operation with the confidence of someone who had a clear vision and was working with limited resources in the form of a father who did not share her spatial intuition. A little more to the left, she said. This is as left as it goes. That's not left enough. Emma. What? Come hold this. She came and held the end of the string, small hands on the plastic clip, very serious about her task. Logan looked down at her. The top of her head, dark hair, completely absorbed in the problem of the lights, and felt the specific, unremarkable miracle of an ordinary moment that would have been impossible 3 months ago if certain things had gone differently. Dad, she said without looking up. Yeah. Is Victoria coming for Christmas? He hadn't discussed this with Victoria, or with Emma for that matter, because the conversation felt large enough that he'd been putting it in the drawer of things he would deal with when he had more bandwidth. He did not currently have more bandwidth, but apparently the timeline had been decided without him. I don't know, he said. I haven't asked her. You should ask her. She might have other plans. Emma looked up at him. Does she? He didn't know. He realized he didn't know what Victoria did for Christmas, who she spent it with, whether she had family that gathered or whether the holiday was something she moved through the way certain people move through occasions that have lost their original shape. He realized this was information that 6 weeks ago would have been none of his business, and that it had quietly become his business without a formal announcement. I'll ask her, he said. Okay. Emma returned to the lights. Tell her she can bring the good coffee. I'll pass that along. He asked her that evening. Not by text. He called, because some things were better said with the full information of a voice. She answered on the second ring. Hey. Hey. He was sitting on the couch in the dark with the Christmas lights on, Emma asleep in the next room. What are you doing for Christmas? A pause. Short, but the kind with content in it. I don't usually, I have some people I see. Former colleagues, a friend from college. She paused again. Nothing fixed. Emma wants to know if you want to come here for Christmas. Silence. Logan? I know, he said. It's okay if you have other... I don't. Her voice was quieter. I don't have other things. A pause. Are you asking because Emma asked, or are you asking because you want me to come? He looked at the Christmas lights on the window, the string that was still not quite far enough to the left. Both, he said. Another silence. This one had a different quality, warmer and a little careful, and he could hear her weighing something on the other end of the line. He didn't rush it. Rushing things with Victoria was the specific category of mistake he'd learned not to make. She told me Gerald could come to Christmas, Victoria said. The stuffed one. She said that? She texted me. Logan stared at the ceiling. When did she get your number? About 3 weeks ago. She asked Ames for it. He stopped. She asked Richard Ames. He thought it was charming. Logan pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. She is 6 years old. She is extremely effective for 6 years old, Victoria said, and now the warmth in her voice was fully operational and she wasn't trying to regulate it. Yes, I'll come for Christmas. Good, he said. Good, she said. The case against Raymond Voss was formally presented to the grand jury in the second week of December, and the indictment that came back was the specific, comprehensive kind that indicated a prosecution that had done its preparation correctly. 17 counts. The word the legal correspondent on the news used was sweeping, and Logan, who had been watching the brief report on his laptop in his new office, thought that sweeping was the right word, and also that it felt both larger and smaller than the thing it was describing, the way public language for private violence usually does. He closed the laptop and went back to his staffing documents. Ames knocked on the door at noon. Lunch? Logan looked up. It was the first time Ames had suggested lunch. In the months they'd worked together, their relationship had been professional and correct, and occasionally genuinely collaborative, but social in only the most functional sense. Logan recognized the overture for what it was. Sure, he said. They went to a place 2 blocks away that Ames clearly went to regularly. The hostess knew him by name and gave him a specific table without asking. They ordered. The conversation began with the case, because it was the natural beginning, and then moved around through other things. The security division's structural questions, a few observations about the company's current state, and then arrived, with the specific inevitability of conversations that are really about one thing, at the actual subject. She's different, Ames said, not looking up from his plate. Since you've been here. Logan looked at him. I've worked for Victoria Langford for 4 years, Ames said. I know what she looks like under pressure. I know what she looks like when she's managing something she doesn't want anyone to see. He finally looked up. She's not managing as much lately. People change. People change when the circumstances change, Ames said. The circumstances changed because of you. Logan picked up his water glass. That's a generous reading. It's an accurate reading. Ames had the expression of a man who'd made the decision to say a thing and was saying it without enjoying the process. I want you to know that I was skeptical when she brought you in. I thought it was a good impulse with bad methodology, that she was reacting emotionally to the diner and making a structural decision on the basis of it. That's a fair read, Logan said. It had some of that in it. Maybe, but it also turned out to be right. He paused. I was wrong. I don't say that often. I'm saying it now so we both know where we are. Logan looked at him for a moment. I know where we are, he said. We're fine, Ames. Ames nodded once. Good. He picked up his fork. The chair in your office squeaks. I'm aware. It's a simple fix. I know. Why haven't you, I don't know, Logan said. I'll get it done. He got the chair replaced the following week, mostly because 3 people in the space of 10 days had mentioned it, and the mild social pressure had accumulated past a threshold. The new chair didn't squeak. It was objectively better. He sat in it for a morning and missed the squeak in the way you sometimes miss things that annoyed you because they were honest about what they were. He didn't tell anyone this. On a Tuesday, in the 3rd week of December, a letter arrived from the federal investigative team handling the James Hayes review. Logan opened it at the kitchen table while Emma was at school, sitting in the same chair where he'd sat with the bills and the legal pad and the business card 3 months ago. The letter was formal and measured and carefully not conclusive, because federal process required careful measurement and the review was still ongoing, but it confirmed that the manner of his father's death had been reclassified from accidental to undetermined pending investigation, and that the documentation from the Harbor Point files had been formally entered into the investigative record. Undetermined pending investigation was not the same as murder. It was not justice completed. It was the beginning of a formal record acknowledging that a man had died in circumstances that were not what they were called. Logan sat with the letter for a long time. He thought about a 15-year-old boy on a subway platform going home because his father's face had told him to go. He thought about the specific weight of a question that you carry for so long it stops feeling like a question and starts feeling like just a part of how you're made. He thought about the difference between carrying something alone and having it finally on paper somewhere, official, acknowledged, part of a record that existed outside his own memory and his mother's grief, and the absence that had been the shape of his life for 17 years. He folded the letter and put it in the folder he'd started after the storage unit visit. The folder that held the photograph of the letter marked for V, the Meridian Holdings filing, his notes on the Harbor Point project. He put the federal letter at the front, where it would be the first thing he saw when he opened it. Then he closed the folder and made himself a cup of coffee and sat in the quiet apartment and let the morning be what it was. Later that day, he picked Emma up from school, and she talked without stopping for the 3-block walk to the subway about a project on ecosystems she was doing with a girl named Priya. Different Priya, school Priya, Emma clarified with the efficiency of someone accustomed to maintaining distinctions, and about whether a deep-sea fish could theoretically survive in the East River if the conditions were right, which Emma thought they probably could if the fish was adaptable. And Logan said he thought adaptability was underrated in general. What does underrated mean? Emma asked. It means something is better than people give it credit for being. She thought about this. Like me? Like you, yes. She seemed satisfied with this. She took his hand on the subway stairs, which she still did without self-consciousness in the specific way children do before they understand that hand-holding has social weight. And Logan held her hand on the stairs and thought that he had not felt, in a very long time, the particular steady warmth of a life that was, on balance, going the right direction. Not perfect, not resolved in every detail, not without the complications that were still working themselves out in courtrooms and federal offices and the slow machinery of justice that moved at the speed it moved. But the right direction. Unmistakably, solidly, for the first time in years, the right direction. Emma let go of his hand at the bottom of the stairs, already distracted by something she'd seen on the platform, and Logan watched her go and thought about Christmas and squeaky chairs and the quiet courage of a man who had kept documents and hidden a USB drive for his daughter and written for V on a folder he'd never expected her to find this soon, and all the ways that love, when it's serious, makes provisions for the future it might not be in to see. Christmas at Logan's apartment was not elegant. The tree was a 6-foot Fraser fir that he and Emma had carried 4 blocks from a corner lot on a Saturday morning, which had been more physically demanding than Logan had anticipated and more delightful than Emma had let on beforehand, because the whole operation, selecting, negotiating the price with the lot attendant, arguing about which side of the tree faced front, was apparently the specific kind of errand she'd been wanting for years without having the vocabulary to ask for it. They'd gotten it upstairs through a combination of logistics and mild profanity on Logan's part that Emma had pretended not to hear with the magnanimous generosity of a child collecting information for later. The decorations were a mix of things accumulated over 6 years, some bought, some made, some of uncertain origin. Emma had made 3 ornaments at school that year: a reindeer with one leg longer than the others, a star that was more hexagonal than 5-pointed, and a small painted rectangle with Emma plus Dad written in uneven letters. This last one she hung at eye level, in the most visible position on the tree, with the quiet authority of someone establishing a record. Victoria arrived at noon on Christmas Eve with a bottle of wine, a coffee cake from the Brooklyn bakery that Emma had apparently been consulted about through their ongoing text correspondence, and a small wrapped package that she set under the tree without explanation. She was wearing a dark green sweater and had her hair down, which Logan had not seen before, and she stood in the apartment doorway with her arms full and looked at the apartment, at the lopsided tree and the lights that were still slightly too far right on the window, and Emma's drawings all over the refrigerator, with an expression that Logan couldn't fully read but that had something in it that looked like arriving somewhere. "The coffee cake," Emma said immediately from the couch. "I was told it was a requirement," Victoria said. "It is." Emma came over and examined the box with the focus of a customs inspector. Did you get the one with the streusel? I got the one you described in your text, which involved the words crunchy top approximately 4 times. That's the streusel, Emma confirmed, satisfied. She looked up at Victoria. Your hair is different. I usually keep it up for work. Emma thought about this. You should wear it down more, she said. It looks more like you. Victoria looked at her for a moment with an expression that was briefly and genuinely caught off guard. Then she said, Thank you, Emma, and meant it in a way that went somewhere deeper than the words. Logan took the wine and the coffee cake to the kitchen, and behind him he heard Emma launch into a comprehensive briefing on the tree's decorating history. Which ornament came from where, what the aesthetic philosophy had been, why Gerald the stuffed elephant had been given a position of honor on the second branch from the top. Victoria listened to all of it with the full attention that Emma had correctly identified as one of her better qualities, and Logan stood in his kitchen putting the coffee cake on a plate and thought that this was the kind of moment that doesn't announce itself as significant while it's happening. It just happens. And later you understand what it was. The 3 of them made dinner together, which was more chaotic than efficient. Emma had opinions about how the pasta should be done, and Victoria had made pasta before in ways that conflicted with Emma's opinions. And Logan stood at the stove mediating a culinary philosophical difference between a 6-year-old and a woman who ran an $800 million company, both of whom were completely serious about their positions. The pasta turned out fine. It was slightly overcooked by Emma's preferred standard and slightly undercooked by Victoria's, which meant it was exactly right by any objective measure, though neither of them fully conceded this. They ate at the kitchen table with the Christmas lights visible through the doorway to the living room. Emma talked about the deep-sea ecosystem project, which was apparently now a collaborative work of significant scope. Victoria asked questions that were genuine rather than performative, and Emma answered them with the kind of expansiveness she reserved for people she'd decided were worth the full version. Logan ate his pasta and watched the 2 of them and said less than usual, which neither of them appeared to notice or mind. After dinner, Emma negotiated the opening of one Christmas Eve present, which was a tradition Logan had started when she was 3 and which she now treated as constitutionally protected. She opened the package from Victoria, carefully, with the precise deliberateness of a child who has learned that the wrapping is part of the experience, and found a field guide to deep-sea marine life, illustrated, the kind of book that treats its subject as seriously as it deserves to be treated. Emma went very still for a moment, in the way she went still when something had hit exactly right. How did you know? Emma said. You mentioned bioluminescent organisms about 11 times across our texts, Victoria said. I made an inference. Emma looked at the book. Then she looked at Victoria. This is the best present, she said. It's one present, Logan said. There are more tomorrow. This is still the best one, Emma said, with the certainty of someone who had already done the ranking and was simply reporting the results. She fell asleep on the couch at 8:30 with the field guide open on her lap, which Logan had anticipated and had planned for by already moving Gerald to within arm's reach. He carried her to bed, removed her socks, which she'd kicked halfway off in her sleep, arranged Gerald in the standard position, and stood in the doorway for a moment doing the thing he always did, listening to her breathe, counting the steady rhythm of it, doing the specific arithmetic of gratitude that he'd been doing since she was 3 weeks old in a hospital bassinet, and he'd stood beside her in the dark and made a series of very serious unspoken promises. When he came back to the living room, Victoria was in the kitchen washing the dishes, which he hadn't asked her to do, and which she was doing with the focused, slightly overqualified energy of someone who needed something to do with their hands. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. She didn't stop. I'm doing it anyway. He picked up a dish towel and started drying. They worked side by side in the kitchen in the quiet that follows a child falling asleep, which was a specific kind of quiet, settled, relieved, gentle. Outside, the city was doing its Christmas Eve version of itself, which was still the city but softer at the edges. She's remarkable, Victoria said. Yeah. Not just because she's yours. She's remarkable on her own terms. She handed him a bowl. She looks at the world like it's something she's going to figure out if she just examines it long enough. She gets that from her mother, Logan said. He said it without planning to, which meant it came out the way true things come out when they're not being managed. Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. What was she like? Smart, impatient. She laughed at things I didn't expect her to laugh at. He dried the bowl. She died when Emma was 8 months old, pulmonary embolism. She went to sleep and she didn't wake up. He set the bowl on the counter. Emma doesn't remember her. She knows about her from me and from photographs and from a few stories my mother used to tell before my mother died. But she doesn't— He paused. She doesn't have the grief of it. She just has the absence, which is its own thing. And you've carried both, Victoria said. For a while, he said. It gets lighter. Not smaller, lighter. Different to carry. She handed him the last dish. They stood in the kitchen with the Christmas lights from the living room making the edges of everything soft. My mother used to make coffee cake on Christmas Eve, Victoria said. That's why I brought it, not because Emma asked, specifically. I would have found a reason anyway. She looked at the empty plate on the counter where the coffee cake had been. My mother died when I was 14, accident, and then my father when I was 22, and by the time I started the company, I was doing it without— She stopped. I got good at not needing things to be the way they're supposed to be. That's not the same as not wanting them to be, Logan said. She looked at him. No, she said. It's not. The Christmas lights were doing their quiet work in the next room. Logan put the dish towel on the counter and turned to face her, and the thing that had been in the room between them for weeks, quietly and persistently, finally ran out of space to hide in. I don't know how to do this slowly, he said. I should probably know. I've been careful about everything for 6 years, but this— He stopped, tried again. You're the first person in a long time that I've stopped being careful around. I don't know when that happened. I just noticed it was already true. Victoria looked at him with those direct, measuring eyes, and this time what was in them was entirely unmeasured. I've been noticing it too, she said. I just kept waiting for you to be complicated. I am complicated. I know, but you're complicated in ways I understand. She paused. That's new for me. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, Merry Christmas, which wasn't what he'd meant to say and was somehow exactly right. She smiled, the real one, the one that happened before the decision to— and said, Merry Christmas, Logan. And they stood in his small kitchen on Christmas Eve, and the city was quiet outside, and Emma was asleep with her field guide, and Gerald and everything had the specific, unheroic, completely genuine quality of a moment that didn't need to be anything more than what it was. He kissed her, finally, the way you do something you've been not doing for a while, without ceremony, and with the specific relief of stopping the pretense that it wasn't going to happen. She kissed him back without hesitation, which he would later consider a very accurate summary of her character. The new year arrived, and with it, the continued momentum of the federal case, which had developed by January into something that the financial press was calling one of the most significant corporate fraud prosecutions in the last decade, which Logan read about in short articles, and then set aside because the scale of the public narrative had almost nothing to do with what the thing had actually felt like from the inside. From the inside, it had felt like an overturned table in a diner and a USB drive in a storage unit, and a 15-year-old boy going home on the subway because his father's face had told him to. The public narrative was correct, but it was also, in the way that public narratives always are, a different story than the one that had actually happened. Raymond Voss entered a not guilty plea in January, which his lawyers had announced they would do, and which meant the trial was set for the following fall, which meant another 9 months of the case living in a specific holding pattern of legal preparation. Logan followed it at a distance through Sorensen's periodic updates and the brief news cycle pieces that he read once and didn't revisit. He had learned in the years since his father's death that the thing you actually need is rarely the verdict. The verdict is for the record, for the law, for the structure that makes accountability possible. What you need is the knowledge that it happened, the fact of it existing somewhere outside your own head, and that he had gotten in October in a storage unit in Queens when Victoria found a letter hidden in box 16. Everything after that was necessary but supplemental. The James Hayes formal investigation concluded in February. Sorensen called him on a Wednesday morning while Logan was walking from the parking garage to the Langford Capitol building, and Logan stopped on the sidewalk in the cold and listened to the careful, measured language of the federal conclusion, that the investigation had found sufficient cause to reclassify the death of James Hayes as a homicide by persons acting in coordination with the Harbor Point concealment scheme, and that the relevant parties had been charged accordingly as part of the Voss indictment. Homicide. An official word on an official record, 26 years after the fact. Logan stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his phone in his hand in the cold morning air, doing what cold morning air does, and thought about his father in ways he hadn't let himself think in a long time. Not the fragments and the managed grief of the past 17 years, but the whole thing. James Hayes at 41, a man who had been good at his job and who had found something he shouldn't have seen and who had tried, in the limited way available to him, to do the right thing about it. A man who had looked up from an argument in an unfinished building and seen his 15-year-old son standing in the dark and whose face had said, "Go home," because he understood in that moment that the most important thing he could do was keep the boy out of it, which was, Logan thought, exactly what he'd spent the last 6 years doing with Emma. The same instinct, the same specific form of love that expresses itself as protection rather than provision. His father had given him that. He stood on the sidewalk until he was sure his voice was going to work normally. Then he called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. "I saw Sorensen's name on your call log. Ames patches me the security alerts. What did he say?" "They reclassified it. Homicide. Voss is charged." A pause. "Logan." "Yeah." "Are you okay?" He looked at the building across the street, at the ordinary Manhattan morning going about its business, at a woman with a stroller and a man eating a bagel and a delivery driver double parked with his hazards on, and all of it completely indifferent and completely alive. "Yeah," he said. "I actually am." He heard her exhale. "Come upstairs when you're ready. I'll have coffee." "I'll be up in 5 minutes." "Take 10, she said. "Take whatever you need." He took 7 and then went up. The security division that Logan had been building since November launched formally in March, with 4 people he'd hired himself and a set of protocols that Ames had reviewed, and on the 3rd revision, declared sound with the specific satisfaction of a man who'd been operating without adequate infrastructure for too long. The division was small, and Logan intended it to stay that way. He had no interest in building something large and bureaucratic that would replicate the structural vulnerabilities that had allowed Voss's network to operate inside the company for 8 years. Small meant accountable. Small meant every person knew what every other person was doing. He hired Priya away from the IT department and into the security division, which caused a minor departmental complaint that Victoria resolved by giving IT a budget increase and Priya a title that acknowledged what she actually did. Priya accepted the transfer with the particular efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for it and didn't feel the need to make a production of the occasion. "You're going to make me do the boring stuff sometimes," Priya said on her first day in the new division. "Yes," Logan confirmed, "like audit logs and compliance reviews." "Yes." "That's fine," she said. "The boring stuff is usually where the bad things are hiding." She sat down at her new desk and opened her laptop. "The chair in here doesn't squeak." "I know, I requested the good chairs." "Wise." The first case the division handled on its own, without Logan's direct involvement in every step, was a vendor fraud situation that Priya caught in a contract review. A supplier billing the company for services that were technically delivered but structured in a way that suggested a kickback arrangement with a former employee who'd since left. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of internal corruption that large companies accumulate the way ships accumulate barnacles, slowly, invisibly, until someone looks at the hull. Logan sat in on the final review and watched his team present the findings and thought that this was what the work was supposed to be. Not the hallway confrontations and the storage units and the federal investigations. Those were what happened when the preventive work had failed or been deliberately subverted. The daily work was this: the careful, unglamorous maintenance of honesty inside a structure that was always, to some degree, under pressure to be otherwise. Emma came to the office once in March, on a school holiday, because Mrs. Petrova had a doctor's appointment and Logan's schedule was light. Emma was given a visitor badge and treated this as an extremely significant credential, wearing it with the gravity of someone carrying official documentation. She spent the morning mostly with Priya, who taught her 3 things about network security that Emma absorbed with frightening speed and then immediately began applying to a theoretical scenario involving a fictional villain she'd invented named Dr. Kelp, who was, as far as Logan could determine, a marine biologist with unclear motivations and access to bioluminescent technology. At noon, Logan took her to lunch and then walked her through his office, which she inspected with the thoroughness she brought to all inspections. "It's nice," she said. "It's an office." "It smells like your jacket," she said, "like you work here a lot." "I do work here a lot." She sat in his chair, the good, non-squeaking one, and swiveled once, experimentally. "Is this your job now? For real?" "Yeah, for real." "You're not going back to the hardware store?" "No." She swiveled again. "Good," she said. "The hardware store made you tired in a different way." "What way?" She thought about it. Like the tired was from carrying something heavy and putting it down and carrying it again. But now you seem tired from... She frowned, looking for the word. "From actually doing something. That's different." He looked at his 6-year-old daughter in his office chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor, Gerald tucked in her backpack, a visitor badge that she'd already decided she was keeping. "Yeah," he said, "that's different." Spring came to Manhattan the way it always does. Reluctantly and then all at once, the city going from gray to green in what felt like a single week. Emma's follow-up appointments with Dr. Chen were consistently good. The repair was holding, the cardiac function was improving on the trajectory Chen had projected, and Emma herself had the healthy impatience of a child who wanted to run again and had been promised that running was coming. She began running in April, officially, on a Sunday morning in Central Park, with Logan keeping pace beside her and Victoria on the other side, and Emma ran 20 meters and then stopped because she'd seen a dog she wanted to greet, and the whole expedition dissolved into a dog encounter that lasted 15 minutes, and from which Emma extracted a significant quantity of pet therapy and a great deal of information about the dog's name, age, and dietary preferences. "That was technically running," Emma announced on the walk back. "Technically, yes," Victoria said. "I'm very fast." "You went 20 meters before stopping to talk to a stranger's dog," Logan said. "The dog was interesting," Emma said. "Being fast is less important than being interested." Logan looked at Victoria over Emma's head. Victoria pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. It didn't fully work. The trial of Raymond Voss began in September, 13 months after the arrest. Logan testified on the 3rd day, not as the primary witness, but as part of the evidentiary foundation, describing what he'd found in the investigation, what the documentation showed, what Hale had said in the hallway. He sat in the witness box in a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan and answered Carver's questions. She'd crossed to the prosecutorial side of the case, which was where she'd apparently been aiming all along, with the same careful accuracy he'd brought to his debrief a year earlier. He was cross-examined by Voss's lead attorney, a man named Shelbourne, who was very good at his job and whose strategy was to establish Logan as someone acting on personal grievance rather than objective investigation. It was a reasonable strategy. Logan had anticipated it and had spent 20 minutes with the prosecutor the previous afternoon walking through exactly how to handle it. "Mr. Hayes," Shelbourne said, "your father's name appears in documents central to this case, correct?" "Correct." "And you have a personal interest in the outcome of this trial because of that connection?" "I have an interest in the accuracy of the outcome," Logan said. "The same interest anyone has in a proceeding being based on correct information. But you have an emotional stake. I have a personal connection to one part of the evidence," Logan said. "The rest of the evidence, the financial documentation, the communication records, the structural analysis of the network, I had no personal connection to any of it before I began investigating. The findings came from the evidence, not from what I needed the evidence to say." He paused. "If the evidence had pointed somewhere other than Raymond Voss, I would have followed it there." Shelbourne looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has made a move and received an answer he didn't prefer. He asked two more questions that were variations on the same theme and received variations on the same answer, and then he sat down. Logan left the stand and walked back to his seat and looked at the floor for a moment because the room was full of people he didn't want to perform at. He was aware that Victoria was in the gallery. He hadn't looked at her directly, but he knew she was there. He'd known since he came in. Her presence was something he'd gotten so accustomed to in the past year that its absence would have been the thing he noticed. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict came back on a Tuesday afternoon in October, exactly 1 year and 4 days after the arrest in New Jersey. Guilty on 14 of 17 counts, including the conspiracy and fraud charges that formed the backbone of the prosecution, and the charges connected to the deaths of James Hayes and Franklin Langford. Logan heard the verdict from Carver, who called him in the courthouse corridor 2 minutes after it came down. He was leaning against the wall with a cup of bad coffee he'd gotten from a machine in the hall, and Carver's voice was even and professional, and she read him the counts one by one, and he listened to each one. When she finished, he said, "Thank you." And she said, "You did the work," which, from Carver, was the equivalent of a full standing ovation. He put the phone in his pocket. Victoria found him 2 minutes later, coming down the corridor from the gallery. She was moving quickly, and she stopped in front of him and looked at his face and read whatever was in it. "Guilty," he said. She closed her eyes for a second, then she opened them. "All counts?" 14 of 17. She nodded. Her jaw was tight in the way it got when something was large and she was keeping it from overflowing in a public corridor. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Your father," Logan said. "It's in the record. 14 counts. His name is in it." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that was not performance and was not composed, and was completely her, the version of her that didn't exist for the company or the board or the professional world, the version that Emma had correctly identified as the one that looked more like her. "My father tried to stop it," she said. "He was part of it first, and then he tried to stop it." "He left you the documentation to finish it," Logan said. "That's what the USB drive was. It wasn't evidence he kept for leverage. It was something he left for you in case he couldn't finish what he started." She was quiet for a moment. "He labeled the folder for V," she said. "He labeled the folder for V." They stood in the courthouse corridor with that between them. The weight of two fathers, both imperfect, both trying in the particular ways available to them, both leaving things for children who would carry them forward. It was not a neat resolution. It was not a clean accounting. But it was true. And true had been the thing they'd been looking for since October, and they had it now. "Come on," Logan said. "Let's go tell Emma." Emma received the news with the seriousness she reserved for important things, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of apple juice, listening to the short version that Logan gave her. That the bad people who'd been making trouble for Victoria were going to be in trouble now because the courts had decided they'd done wrong things. She thought about this for a moment. "Are we safe now?" she said. "Yeah," Logan said. "We're safe." She thought about it a little more. "Was it like what you used to do in the Navy?" "A little, different tools." "But you helped." "Yeah, I helped." She nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. Then, "Can we have the egg rolls?" They had the egg rolls. November was quiet in the specific way that follows a long, loud thing finally ending. Logan woke up on the first Saturday of the month and lay in bed and listened to the city and noticed that he was not cataloging anything. Not running threat assessments, not doing the automatic arithmetic of a person who expects the situation to change. He was just lying in bed on a Saturday morning, which was something he hadn't done without the underlying hum of operational alertness for so long that the absence of it was briefly disorienting and then was simply peaceful. He made breakfast. Emma ate it and declared the eggs correct, which was the specific form of culinary review she provided when all parameters had been met. Victoria came over that afternoon, which had become the default Saturday rhythm without formal agreement, the kind of arrangement that forms not by decision but by accumulation, each week making the next one more natural. She brought the good coffee and a novel she'd been reading, and she sat on the couch with her feet tucked under her while Emma explained a new theory about thermal vents, and Logan sat in the chair across from them and thought about what it meant to have arrived somewhere. Not completed. He'd stopped thinking in terms of completion a long time ago. That was the thinking that came from a life lived in anticipated crisis, where done meant safe and safe was the goal. The goal wasn't safety anymore. The goal was this: Emma's voice in the living room and Victoria turning pages with the occasional real response to whatever theory was currently under discussion, and the particular Saturday afternoon light of a New York November coming through a window where the Christmas lights would go up in 3 more weeks, slightly too far to the right, and stubbornly staying there. The proposal, when it happened, was not planned. It was a Sunday in December, 2 weeks before Christmas, and they were in the kitchen of Victoria's apartment, a different kitchen than Logan was used to, larger and more professionally equipped in a way that Victoria used maybe 30% of, making dinner that was going moderately well. Emma was at Mrs. Petrova's. It was the specific quiet of a space that didn't have Emma in it, which had a different quality than the quiet of a space that had never had Emma in it, because the absence of a person you love is its own kind of presence. They were cooking and talking about nothing important, some problem Victoria was having with a vendor negotiation, which Logan had an opinion about. And then they weren't talking, and Logan was looking at Victoria, who was looking at the thing she was doing, and he was thinking about a year ago in this same month when he'd been sitting at a kitchen table with bills and a business card and a legal pad, and about how that was the same man, and also not remotely the same situation, and about the specific quality of the changes that had happened in between. Emma asked me, he said, whether you were going to be around for a long time. Victoria looked up from what she was doing. I told her I thought so, he said. She said that was good, and that she wanted the answer to be official. Official, Victoria repeated. Her word. She's 6. She's 7 in February, Logan said. She has very precise opinions about official things. Victoria looked at him. The kitchen was quiet, and the city was doing its thing outside, and there was nothing in particular making this the moment except that it was the moment, which was how moments tended to work. I'm not going to do this the right way, he said. I don't have a ring on me. I haven't planned a speech. I don't want a speech, she said. I know. He looked at her. But I want to ask you, properly, not because Emma declared it should be official, though she's not wrong. A pause. Because you're the first thing in a long time that I haven't wanted to protect myself from, and I've spent a long time being very good at protecting myself, so I know the difference. Victoria was completely still. Not the controlled stillness she used professionally, the actual stillness of a person who is entirely present in a single moment. I'm not easy, she said. I'm aware of that. I know. I work too much. I keep things in until they're organized, which means I'm bad at saying them in the moment. I have opinions about everything. She paused. I have opinions about pasta. I know, he said. I've had pasta with you. And you still, and I still, he said. She looked at him for a long moment with everything she was visible in her face, undivided and unmanaged. And then she said, yes, not loudly or dramatically, just with the complete, uncomplicated certainty of a person who has made a decision she's entirely at peace with. He crossed the kitchen and she met him halfway, which was, he thought, exactly characteristic of both of them. They told Emma on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table, and Emma listened to the explanation with the focused attention she brought to important information. When Logan finished, she looked at Victoria. So you'll be here all the time? Emma said. More of the time, Victoria said. Some things will change gradually. Will you still text me? Of course. Because I prefer texts for some things, Emma explained. It's easier to think about what I want to say. I know, Victoria said. I'm the same way. Emma considered this whole arrangement for a long moment with the profound seriousness of a 7-year-old assessing a change to her fundamental operating environment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when a conclusion had been reached. Okay, she said, but I still get the egg roll place on Tuesdays. That's non-negotiable, Logan said. I accept that, Victoria said. Emma returned to her drawing, which was her signal that the matter was settled and they could proceed. Logan looked at Victoria across the table, and Victoria looked at him, and there was something in the look between them that was too complicated and too ordinary and too real to be expressed in any particular way, so neither of them tried. The wedding was in April. Not large. 30 people in a space downtown that had good light and enough room for Emma to move around in without feeling contained, which had been a specific requirement. Diane Reyes came and cried in a way that she was visibly irritated at herself for. Ames came and did not cry, but shook Logan's hand with both of his in the specific way that men who don't know how to express warmth express it anyway. Priya came and spent most of the reception talking to Emma about marine biology. Carver sent a card, which Logan had not expected and which he kept. Emma wore a dress that she had strong opinions about and shoes that she had agreed to wear for the ceremony and then changed out of at the earliest possible moment. She stood beside Logan during the vows and held Gerald, which she'd requested and which Logan had agreed to on the grounds that Gerald had been through everything and deserved to be present for this. The vows were not long. Neither of them had wanted long. What Logan said was simple, that he had spent years not knowing what he was for outside of the specific purpose of keeping Emma safe, and that Victoria had shown him, without trying to, that purpose didn't have to be a wall you built to keep the world out. That love, when it was real, was less like a fortress and more like a door you chose to leave open. Victoria said she had built an empire, and it had not been enough, and she had learned in the last year that the things that were enough were not things you could build. They were things you found, or things that found you, and then things you chose every day after that. She said she was choosing. She looked at Emma while she said it, and then she looked at Logan, and Emma was holding Gerald with both hands and looking back at her with those dark eyes that didn't miss anything. There was not a dry eye in the room, including Ames, who had clearly revised his earlier position. Afterward, at dinner, Emma made a toast. It was unprompted and consisted of the following. Gerald says congratulations. I also say congratulations. The egg rolls are still on Tuesdays. She sat down. The room laughed. Emma accepted this response with the dignity of someone who had said what needed to be said. Logan stood at the edge of the room a little later, watching his daughter move through the crowd of people with the unstoppable social confidence of a child who has never doubted that she was worth talking to, and thought about the morning in Patty's diner that had started all of this. The bad coffee and the coloring page and the 15 seconds when the world had rearranged itself around a decision he hadn't known he was making. People talk about defining moments like they're obvious when they happen, like some interior alarm goes off and says, "This is it, pay attention." In Logan's experience, the actual defining moments looked, from the inside, like just the next thing. You reacted because a threat walked through a door. You accepted a business card because you had a daughter who needed treatment you couldn't afford. You went to a meeting because the alternative was living with a question you'd stopped allowing yourself to ask. None of it felt like a story while it was happening. It felt like Tuesday. The story was what you found when you looked back at the Tuesdays and understood what they'd been building toward. Victoria appeared beside him. She had her shoes off, had been carrying them for the last half hour with the unapologetic practicality of a woman who was done performing comfort. She stood beside him and looked at the room, and he looked at her. "What are you thinking?" she said. "That a year ago I was working 2 jobs and eating bad eggs and trying to make myself small enough to be invisible. And now? And now Emma is giving toasts and arguing about marine biology with my IT director, and the person I love most outside of her is standing next to me without her shoes on." He paused. "I'm thinking that some things can't be planned. They just have to be allowed." She leaned against him, the specific easy weight of someone who is entirely comfortable exactly where they are. "You allowed it," she said. "You could have walked away at Patty's. You could have not taken the card. You could have—" "I could have," he said, "but I couldn't, really. Not after Emma was in the room." "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" Victoria said. "It wasn't about being brave. It was about not being able to be anything other than what you are when the stakes were real." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "That's probably it." Emma ran past them at speed, having apparently located a reason to run, her shoes also gone now, and she called, "Dad!" without stopping, and he called, "Yeah!" without turning, and she was already across the room and into the next conversation, and the room moved around her like she was the center of it, which she was. Some people spend their whole lives learning that the things they were running from were the things they needed. Some people never learn it at all. Logan Hayes had needed a Tuesday morning in a diner on West 46th Street. 3 men with guns, a woman with a business card and her father's secrets, a USB drive labeled for V, a man with gray in his beard who had looked at his own hands and decided he was done, and a daughter who, coloring while the world fell apart, had simply asked, "Is it over?" It was over. And what had replaced it was this: a room full of people, a daughter without shoes, a wife with the specific gravity of someone who had always moved rooms around her and had finally found a room she wanted to stay in, and the ordinary, extraordinary, completely unremarkable business of a life that was no longer organized around surviving, but around something that required more courage than survival had ever asked for. The business of being, without apology or reservation, exactly where you were supposed to be. Outside, April was doing its thing. The city green and loud and alive, indifferent and present in equal measure, the way it always was, the way it always would be. Inside, Emma found Gerald under a chair and held him up in triumph. Logan saw it and smiled. Victoria saw him smile. The room went on around all of them, full of noise and people and the ordinary beauty of things that are simply, stubbornly, thankfully real.